Part 3, Chapter 8 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit Librivox.org. Recording by Angelique Campbell. Chapter 8, Kidnapping. The principle which declares that one human being may lawfully hold another as property leads directly to the trade in human beings, and that trade has, among its other horrible results, the temptation to the crime of kidnapping. The trader is generally a man of coarse nature and low associations, hard-hearted, and reckless of right or honor. He who is not so is an exception rather than a specimen. If he has anything good about him when he begins the business, it may well be seen that he is in a fair way to lose it. Around the trader are continually passing and repassing men and women who would be worth to him thousands of dollars in the way of trade, who belong to a class whose rights nobody respects, and who, if reduced to slavery, could not easily make their word good against him. The probability is that hundreds of free men and women and children are all the time being precipitated into slavery in this way. The recent case of Northrop, tried in Washington, D.C., throws light on this fearful subject. The following account is abridged from the New York Times. Solomon Northrop is a free colored citizen of the United States. He was born in Essex County, New York, about the year 1808, became early a resident of Washington County, and married there in 1829. His father and mother resided in the county of Washington about 50 years, till their decease, and both were free. With his wife and children, he resided at Saratoga Springs in the winter of 1841, and while there was employed by two gentlemen to drive a team south at the rate of $1 a day. In fulfillment of his employment, he proceeded to New York, and having taken out free papers to show that he was a citizen, he went on to Washington City, where he arrived the 2nd day of April the same year, and put up at Gadby's Hotel. Soon after he arrived he felt unwell and went to bed. While suffering with severe pain, some persons came in, and seeing the condition he was in, proposed to give him some medicine, and did so. This is the last thing of which he had any recollection until he found himself chained to the floor of William's slave pen in this city and handcuffed. In the course of a few hours James H. Birch, a slave dealer, came in, and the colored man asked him to take the irons off from him, and wanted to know why they were put on. Birch told him it was none of his business. The colored man said he was free, and told where he was born. Birch called in a man by the name of Ebenezer Rodberry, and they two stripped the man and laid him across a bench, Rodberry holding him down by his wrists. Birch whipped him with a paddle until he broke that, and then with a cat-o'-nine-tails, giving him 100 lashes, and he swore he would kill him if he ever stated to anyone that he was a free man. From that time forward the man says he did not communicate the fact from fear, either that he was a free man or what his name was, until the last summer. He was kept in the slave pen about 10 days, when he, with others, were taken out of the pen in the night by Birch, handcuffed and shackled, and taken down the river by a steamboat, and then to Richmond, where he, with 48 others, were put on board the brig Orleans. There Birch left them. The brig sailed for New Orleans, and on arriving there, before she was fastened to the wharf, Theophilus Freeman, another slave dealer, belonging in the city of New Orleans, and who in 1833 had been a partner with Birch in the slave trade, came to the wharf and received the slaves as they were landed, under his direction. This man was immediately taken by Freeman and shut up in his pen in that city. He was taken sick with the smallpox immediately after getting there, and was sent to a hospital, where he lay 2 or 3 weeks. When he had sufficiently recovered to leave the hospital, Freeman declined to sell him to any person in that vicinity, and sold him to a Mr. Ford, who resided in Rapides Parish, Louisiana, where he was taken and lived more than a year, and worked as a carpenter, working with Ford at that business. Ford became involved and had to sell him. A Mr. Thibault became the purchaser. He in a short time sold him to Edwin Epps in Bayou Boeuf, about 130 miles from the mouth of Red River, where Epps had retained him on a cotton plantation since the year 1843. To go back a step in the narrative, the man wrote a letter in June 1841 to Henry B. Northrop of the State of New York, dated and postmarked at New Orleans, stating that he had been kidnapped and was on board a vessel, but was unable to state what his destination was, but requesting Mr. N. to aid him in recovering his freedom if possible. Mr. N. was unable to do anything in his behalf in consequence of not knowing where he had gone and not being able to find any trace of him. His place of residence remained unknown until the month of September last, when the following letter was received by his friends from Bayou Boeuf, August, 1852. Mr. William Peeney or Mr. Lewis Parker, gentlemen, it having been a long time since I have seen or heard from you, and not knowing that you are living, it is with uncertainty that I write to you, but the necessity of the case must be my excuse. Having been born free just across the river from you, I am certain you know me, and I am here now a slave. I wish you to obtain free papers for me, and forward them to me at Marksville, Louisiana, parish of Audiobooks, and oblige, yours, Solomon Northrop. On receiving the above letter, Mr. N. applied to Governor Hunt, of New York, for such authority as was necessary for him to proceed to Louisiana as an agent to procure the liberation of Solomon. Proof of his freedom was furnished to Governor Hunt by affidavits of several gentlemen, General Clark among others. Accordingly, in pursuance of the laws of New York, Henry B. Northrop was constituted an agent to take such steps by procuring evidence, retaining counsel, and etc., as were necessary to secure the freedom of Solomon, and to execute all the duties of his agency. The result of Mr. Northrop's agency was the establishing of the claim of Solomon Northrop to freedom and restoring him to his native land. It is a singular coincidence that this man was carried to a plantation in the Red River country, that same region where the scene of Tom's captivity was laid, and his account of this plantation, his mode of life there, and some incidents which he describes, form a striking parallel of that history. We extract them from the article of the Times. The condition of this colored man during the 9 years that he was in the hands of Epps was of a character nearly approaching that described by Mrs. Stowe as the condition of Uncle Tom while in that region. During that whole period his hut contained neither a floor, nor a chair, nor a bed, nor a mattress, nor anything for him to lie upon, except a board about 12 inches wide, with a block of wood for his pillow, and with a single blanket to cover him, while the walls of his hut did not by any means protect him from the inclemency of the weather. He was sometimes compelled to perform acts revolting to humanity, and outrageous in the highest degree. On one occasion, a colored girl belonging to Epps, about 17 years of age, went one Sunday, without the permission of her master, to the nearest plantation, about half a mile distant, to visit another colored girl of her acquaintance. She returned in the course of 2 or 3 hours, and for that offence she was called up for punishment, which Solomon was required to inflict. Epps compelled him to drive 4 stakes into the ground at such distance that the hands and ankles of the girl might be tied to them, as she lay with her face upon the ground, and having thus fastened her down, he compelled him, while standing by himself, to inflict 100 lashes upon her bare flesh, she being stripped naked. Having inflicted the 100 blows, Solomon refused to proceed any further. Epps tried to compel him to go on, but he absolutely set him at defiance, and refused to murder the girl. Epps then seized the whip and applied it until he was too weary to continue it. Blood flowed from her neck to her feet, and in this condition she was compelled the next day to go into the field to work as a field hand. She bears the marks still upon her body, although the punishment was inflicted 4 years ago. When Solomon was about to leave, under the care of Mr. Northrop, this girl came from behind her hut, unseen by her master, and, throwing her arms around the neck of Solomon, congratulated him on his escape from slavery and his return to his family. At the same time, in language of despair, exclaiming, "But, oh God, what will become of me?" These statements regarding the condition of Solomon while with Epps, and the punishment and brutal treatment of the colored girls, are taken from Solomon himself. It has been stated that the nearest plantation was distant that of Epps a half-mile, and of course there could be no interference on the part of neighbors in any punishment, however cruel, or however well disposed to interfere they might be. Had not Northrop been able to write, as few of the free blacks in the slave states are, his doom might have been sealed for life in this den of misery. 2 cases recently tried in Baltimore also unfold facts of a similar nature. The following is from the case of Rachel Parker and her sister. It will be remembered that more than a year since, a young colored woman named Mary Elizabeth Parker was abducted from Chester County and conveyed to Baltimore, where she was sold as a slave and transported to New Orleans. A few days after, her sister, Rachel Parker, was also abducted in like manner, taken to Baltimore, and detained there in consequence of the interference of her Chester County friends. In the first case, Mary Elizabeth was, by an arrangement with the individual who had her in charge, brought back to Baltimore to await her trial on a petition for freedom. So also with regard to Rachel. Both, after trial, the proof in their favor being so overwhelming, were discharged and are now among their friends in Chester County. In this connection we give the narrative of both females, obtained since their release. Rachel Parker's narrative. I was taken from Joseph C. Miller's about 12 o'clock on Tuesday, December 30th, 1851, by 2 men who came up to the house by the back door. One came in and asked Mrs. Miller where Jessie McCreary lived, and then seized me by the arm and pulled me out of the house. Mrs. Miller called to her husband, who was in the front porch, and he ran out and seized the man by the collar and tried to stop him. The other, with an oath, then told him to take his hands off, and if he touched me he would kill him. He then told Miller that I belonged to Mr. Schoolfield in Baltimore. They then hurried me to a wagon where there was another large man, put me in, and drove off. Mr. Miller ran across the field to head the wagon and picked up a stake to run through the wheel, when one of the men pulled out a sword, I think it was a sword, I never saw one, and threatened to cut Miller's arm off. Pollock's wagon being in the way and he refusing to get out of the road, we turned off to the left. After we rode away, one of the men tore a hole in the back of the carriage to look out to see if they were coming after us, and they said they wished they had given Miller and Pollock a blow. We stopped at a tavern near the railroad, and I told the landlord, I think it was, that I was free. I also told several people at the car office, and a very nice-looking man at the car office was talking at the door, and he said he thought that they had better take me back again. One of the men did not come further than the tavern. I was taken to Baltimore, where we arrived about 7 o'clock the same evening, and I was taken to jail. The next morning a man with large light-colored whiskers took me away by myself, and asked me if I was not Mr. Schoolfield's slave. I told him I was not. He said that I was, and that if I did not say I was he would cowhide me and salt me and put me in a dungeon. I told him I was free, and that I would say nothing but the truth. Mary E. Parker's narrative. I was taken from Matthew Donnelly's on Saturday night, December 6th or 13th, 1851. Was caught whilst out of doors, soon after I had cleared the supper table, about 7 o'clock, by 2 men, and put into a wagon. One of them got into the wagon with me and rode to Elkton, Maryland, where I was kept until Sunday night at 12 o'clock, when I left there in the cars for Baltimore, and arrived there early on Monday morning. At Elkton a man was brought in to see me by one of the men, who said that I was not his father's slave. Afterwards, when on the way to Baltimore in the cars, a man told me that I must say that I was Mr. Schoolfield's slave or he would shoot me, and pulled a rifle out of his pocket and showed it to me, and also threatened to whip me. On Monday morning Mr. Schoolfield called at the jail in Baltimore to see me, and on Tuesday morning he brought his wife and several other ladies to see me. I told them that I did not know them, and then Mr. C. took me out of the room and told me who they were, and took me back again, so that I might appear to know them. On the next Monday I was shipped to New Orleans. It took about a month to get to New Orleans. After I had been there about a week, Mr. C. sold me to Madame C., who kept a large flower garden. She sends flowers to sell to the theatres, sells milk in market, and etc. I went out to sell candy and flowers for her when I lived with her. One evening, when I was coming home from the theatre, a watchman took me up, and I told him I was not a slave. He put me in the caboose, and next morning took me before a magistrate, who sent for Madame C., who told him she bought me. He then sent for Mr. C., and told him he must account for how he got me. Mr. C. said that my mother and all the family were free, except me. The magistrate told me to go back to Madame C., and he told Madame C. that she must not let me go out at night, and he told Mr. C. that he must prove how he came by me. The magistrate afterwards called on Mrs. C. at her house, and had a long talk with her in the parlour. I do not know what he said, as they were by themselves. About a month afterwards I was sent back to Baltimore. I lived with Madame C. about 6 months. There were 6 slaves came in the vessel with me to Baltimore, who belonged to Mr. D., and returned because they were sickly. A man called to see me at the jail after I came back to Baltimore, and told me that I must say I was Mr. Schoolfield's slave, and that if I did not do it he would kill me the first time he got a chance. He said Rachel, who was her sister, said she came from Baltimore, and was Mr. Schoolfield's slave. Afterwards some gentlemen called on me, Judge Campbell and Judge Bell of Philadelphia, and William H. Norris, Esquire of Baltimore, and I told them that I was Mr. Schoolfield's slave. They said they were my friends, and I must tell them the truth. I then told them who I was, and all about it. When I was in New Orleans, Mr. C. whipped me because I said that I was free. Elizabeth, by her own account above, was seized and taken from Philadelphia, December 6th or 13th, 1851, which is confirmed by other testimony. It is conceded that such cases, when brought into Southern courts, are generally tried with great fairness and impartiality. The agent for Northrop's release testifies to this, and it has been generally admitted fact. But it is probably only one case in 100 that can get into court. Of the multitudes who are drawn down in the ever-widening maelstrom, only now and then one ever comes back to tell the tale. The succeeding chapter of advertisements will show the reader how many such victims there may probably be. End of Part 3, Chapter 8, Kidnapping.
Part 3, Chapter 9 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in October 2018. Chapter 9, Slaves as They Are, on Testimony of Owners. The investigation into the actual condition of the slave population at the South is beset with many difficulties. So many things are said pro and con, so many said in one connection and denied in another, that the effect is very confusing. Thus we are told that the state of the slaves is one of blissful contentment, that they would not take freedom as a gift, that their family relations are only now and then invaded, that they are a stupid race, almost sunk to the condition of animals, that generally they are kindly treated, etc., etc., etc. In reading over some 200 Southern newspapers this fall, the author has been struck with the very graphic and circumstantial pictures which occur in all of them, describing fugitive slaves. From these descriptions one may learn a vast many things. The author will here give an assortment of them, taken at random. It is a commentary on the contented state of the slave population that the writer finds 2 or 3 always, and often many more, in every one of the hundreds of Southern papers examined. In reading the following little sketches of slaves as they are, let the reader notice: 1. The color and complexion of the majority of them. 2. that it is customary either to describe slaves by some scar or to say, no scars recollected. 3. The intelligence of the parties advertised. 4. The number that say they are free that are to be sold to pay jail fees. Every one of these slaves has a history of woe and crime, degradation, endurance, and wrong. Let us open the chapter. Southside Democrat, October 28, 1852, Petersburg, Virginia. Reward: $25 with the payment of all necessary expenses will be given for the apprehension and delivery of my man Charles, if taken on the Appomattox River or within the precincts of Petersburg. He ran off about a week ago, and if he leaves the neighborhood will no doubt make for Farmville and Petersburg. He is a mulatto, rather below the medium height and size, but well proportioned and very active and sensible. He is aged about 27 years, has a mild, submissive look, and will no doubt show the marks of a recent whipping if taken. He must be delivered to the care of Peebles, White, Davis & Company. R. H. Desjarnette, Lunenburg. Stowe's comment: Poor Charles, mulatto, has a mild, submissive look, and will probably show marks of a recent whipping. Kosciuszko Chronicle, November 24, 1852. Committed to the jail of Attila County on the 8th instant, a Negro boy who calls his name Green and says he belongs to James Gray of Winston County. Said boy is about 20 years old, yellow complexion, round face, has a scar on his face, one on his left thigh and one in his left hand, is about 5 feet 6 inches high. Had on, when taken up, a cotton check shirt, linsey pants, new cloth cap, and was riding a large roan horse, about 12 or 14 years old and thin in order. The owner is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be sold to pay charges. E. B. Sanders, jailer, A.C. Capitolian vis-a-vis West Baton Rouge, November 1, 1852. $100 reward. Run away from the subscriber in Randolph County on the 18th of October, a yellow boy named Jim. This boy is 19 years old, a light mulatto with dirty sunburnt hair, inclined to be straight. He is just 5 feet 7 inches high and slightly made. He had on when he left a black cloth cap, black cloth pantaloons, a plaided sack coat, a fine shirt, and brogan shoes. $100 will be paid for the recovery of the above-described boy if taken out of the state, or $50 if taken in the state. Mrs. S. P. Hall, Huntsville, Missouri. American Baptist, December 20th, 1852. $20 reward for a preacher. The following paragraph, headed $20 reward, appeared in a recent number of the New Orleans Picayune. Run away from the plantation of the undersigned, the Negro man Shedrick, a preacher, 5 feet 9 inches high, about 40 years old, but looking not over 23, stamped N.E. on the breast, and having both small toes cut off. He is of a very dark complexion, with eyes small but bright, and a look quite insolent. He dresses good, and was arrested as a runaway at Donaldsonville some 3 years ago. The above reward will be paid for his arrest by addressing Messrs. Armont Brothers, St. James Parish, or A. Miltonberger and Company, 30 Carondelet Street. Stowe's comment: Here is a preacher who is branded on the breast and has both toes cut off, and will look insolent yet. There's depravity for you. Jefferson Inquirer, November 27, 1852. $100 reward. Ran away from my plantation in Bolivar County, Mississippi, a Negro man named May, aged 40 years, 5 feet 10 or 11 inches high, copper-colored and very straight. His front teeth are good and stand a little open, stout through the shoulders, and has some scars on his back that show above the skin plane, caused by the whip. He frequently hiccups when eating if he has not got water handy. He was pursued into Ozark County, Missouri, and there left. I will give the above reward for his confinement in jail so that I can get him. James H. Kosar, Victoria, Bolivar County, Mississippi. Stowe's comment: Delightful master to go back to this man must be. The Alabama Standard has for its motto, "Resistance to tyrants is obedience to God." Date of November 29th, this advertisement. Committed to the jail of Choctaw County by Judge Young of Marengo County, a runaway slave who calls his name Billy and says he belongs to the late William Johnson and was in employment of John Jones near Alexandria, Louisiana. He is about 5 feet 10 inches high, black, about 40 years old, much scarred on the face and head, and quite intelligent. The owner is requested to come forward, prove his property, and take him from jail, or he will be disposed of according to law. S.S. Houston, Jailer, C.C. Stowe's comment. Query whether this quite intelligent Billy hadn't been corrupted by hearing this incendiary motto of the Standard. Knoxville, Tennessee, Register, November 3rd. Look out for runaways. $25 reward. Ran away from the subscriber on the night of 26th July last. A Negro woman named Harriet. Said woman is about 5 feet 5 inches high, has prominent cheekbones, large mouth, and good front teeth, tolerably spare built, about 26 years old. We think it probable she is harbored by some Negroes not far from John Maynette's in Knox County, where she and they are likely making some arrangements to get to a free state, or she may be concealed by some Negroes, her connections, in Anderson County, near Clinton. I will give the above reward for her apprehension and confinement in any prison in this state, or I will give $50 for her confinement in any jail out of this state, so that I get her. H.B. Gouins, Clinton, Tennessee. Stowe's comment. Alexandria Gazette, November 29, 1852. Under the device of liberty, trampling on a tyrant, motto Sic Semper Tyrannis, has the following. $25 reward. Run away from the subscriber, living in the county of Rappahannock on Tuesday last. Daniel, a bright mulatto, about 5 feet 8 inches high, about 35 years old, very intelligent, has been a wagoner for several years, and is pretty well acquainted from Richmond to Alexandria. He calls himself Daniel Turner. His hair curls without showing black blood or wool. He has a scar on one cheek, and his left hand has been seriously injured by a pistol shot, and he was shabbily dressed when last seen. I will give the above reward if taken out of the county and secured in jail, so that I get him again, or $10 if taken in the county. A.M.Wells. Rappahannock County, Virginia. Stowe's comment. Another very intelligent, straight-haired man. Who was his father? The New Orleans Daily Crescent, office number 93, St. Charles Street, Tuesday morning, December 13th, 1852. Brought to the 1st District Police Prison, Nancy, a griff, about 34 years old, 5 feet 1 inches high, a scar on her left wrist, says she belongs to Madam Wolfe. Charles Hall, a black, about 13 years old, 5 feet 6 inches high, says he is free, but supposed to be a slave. Philomonia, a mulatress, about 10 years old, 4 feet 3 inches high, says she is free, but supposed to be a slave. Columbus, a griff, about 21 years old, 5 feet 4 3/4 inches high, says he is free, but supposed to be a slave. Seymour, a black, about 21 years old, 5 feet 1 3/4 inch high, says he is free, but supposed to be a slave. The owners will please comply with the law respecting them. J. Worrell, Warden. Stowe's comment. What chance for any of these poor fellows who say they are free? $50 reward. Ran away from the subscriber, living in Unionville, Frederick County, Maryland, on Sunday morning, the 17th instant. A dark mulatto girl, about 18 years of age, 5 feet 4 or 5 inches high, looking pleasant generally, talks very quick, converses tolerably well, and can read. It is supposed she had on, when she left, a red merino dress, black visette or plaid shawl, and a purple calico bonnet, as those articles are missing. A reward of $25 will be given for her if taken in the state, or $50 if taken out of the state and lodged in jail, so that I can get her again. J.R. Sappington, October 13th, Kosciuszko Chronicle, Mississippi. $20 reward will be paid for the delivery of the boy Walker, aged about 28, about 5 feet 8 or 10 inches high, black complexion, loose make, smiles when spoken to, has a mild, sweet voice and fine teeth. Apply at 25 Chapachula Street, upstairs. Stowe's comment: Walker has walked off, it seems. Peace be with him. $25 reward. Ran away from the subscriber, living near White's store, Anson County, on the 3rd of May last, a bright mulatto boy named Bob. Bob is about 5 feet high, will weigh 130 pounds, is about 22 years old, and has some beard on his upper lip. His left leg is somewhat shorter than his right, causing him to hobble in his walk. He has a very broad face and will show color like a white man. It is probable he has gone off with some wagoner or trader, or he may have free papers and be passing as a free man. He has straight hair. I will give a reward of $25 for the apprehension and delivery to me of said boy, or for his confinement in any jail so that I get him again. Clara Lockhart, by Adam Lockhart. June 30th, 1852. Southern Standard, October 16th, 1852. $50 reward. Ran away or stolen from the subscriber, living near Aberdeen, Mississippi, a light mulatto woman of small size, about 23 years of age. She has long black straight hair, and she usually keeps it in good order. When she left, she had on either a white dress or a brown calico one with white spots or figures, and took with her a red handkerchief and a red or pink sunbonnet. She generally dresses very neatly. She generally calls herself Mary Ann Payne, can read print, has some freckles on her face and hands. Shoes, number 4. Had a ring or 2 on her fingers. She's very intelligent and converses well. The above reward will be given for her if taken out of the state, and $25 if taken within the state. U. McAllister. Memphis Weekly Appeal will insert to the amount of $5, and send account to this office. October 6th. Stowe's comment. Much can be seen of this Mary Ann in this picture. The black straight hair usually kept in order, and general neatness of dress, the ring or 2 on the fingers, the ability to read, the fact of being intelligent and conversing well are all to be noticed. $20 reward. Ran away on the 9th of last August, my servant boy Henry. He is 14 or 15 years old, a bright mulatto, has dark eyes, stoops a little, and stutters when confused. Had on, when he went away, white pantaloons, long blue summer coat, and a palm leaf hat. I will give the above reward if he should be taken in the state of Virginia, or $30 if taken in either of the adjoining states, but in either case he must be so secured that I get him again. Edwin C. Fitzhugh. Stowe's comment. Poor Henry, only 14 or 15. Committed to the jail of Lundy's County, Mississippi, on the 9th of May, by J.N.O. K. Pierce, Esquire, and taken up as a runaway slave by William S. Cox, a Negro man, who says his name is Roland, and that he belongs to Major Cathy of Marengo County, Alabama, was sold to him by Henry Williams, a Negro trader from North Carolina. Said Negro is about 35 years old, 5 feet 6 or 8 inches high, dark complexion, weighs about 150 pounds, middle finger on the right hand off at the second joint, and had on, when committed, a black silk hat, black drapette dress coat, and white linsey pants. The owner is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with according to law. L. H. Wilford, jailer. Richmond Semi-Weekly Examiner, October 29, 1852. $50 reward. Run away from the subscriber, residing in the county of Halifax, about the middle of last August, a Negro man, Ned, aged some 30 or 40 years, of medium height, copper color, full forehead, and cheekbones a little prominent. No scars recollected, except one of his fingers, the little one probably, is stiff and crooked. The man Ned was purchased in Richmond of Mr. Robert Goodwin, who resides near Frederick Hall in Louisa County, and has a wife in that vicinity. He has been seen in the neighborhood, and is supposed to have gone over the mountains, and to be now at work as a free man at some of the ironworks, someone having given him free papers. The above reward will be given for the apprehension of the slave Ned and his delivery to R. H. Dickinson and Brothers in Richmond, or to the undersigned in Halifax, Virginia, or 25 if confined in any jail in the Commonwealth, so that I get him. James M. Chappell, firm of Chappell and Tucker. Stowe's comment. This unfortunate copper-colored article is supposed to have gone after his wife. Kentucky Whig, October 22nd, 52. $200 reward. Ran away from the subscriber near Mount Sterling, Kentucky, on the night of the 20th of October, a Negro man named Porter. Said boy is black, about 22 years old, very stout and active, weighs about 165 or 170 pounds. He is a smart fellow, converses well, without the Negro accent, no peculiar scars recollected. He had on a pair of coarse boots, about half worn, no other clothing recollected. He was raised near Sharpsburg, in Bath County, by Harrison Caldwell, and may be lurking in that neighborhood, but will probably endeavor to reach Ohio. I will pay the above-mentioned reward for him, if taken out of the state, $50 if taken in any county bordering on the Ohio River, or $25 if taken in this or any adjoining county, and secured so that I can get him. He is supposed to have ridden a yellow horse, 15 hands and 1 inch high, mane and tail both yellow, 5 years old, and paces well. October 21st, 1852, G. W. Proctor. Stowe's comment. No particular scars recollected. St. Louis Times, October 14th, 1852. Notice. Taken up and committed to jail in the town of Rockbridge, Ozark County, Missouri, on the 31st of August last, a runaway slave who calls his name Moses, had on when taken a brown jeans pantaloons, old cotton shirt, blue frock coat, an old rag tied around his head. He is about 6 feet high, dark complexion, a scar over the left eye, supposed to be about 27 years old. The owner is hereby notified to come forward, prove said Negro, and pay all lawful charges incurred on his account, or the said Negro will be sold at public auction for ready money at the courthouse door in the town of Rockbridge on Monday, the 13th of December next, according to law in such cases made and provided this 9th of September, 1852. Robert Hicks, Sheriff. Charleston Mercury, October 15th, 1852. $50 reward. Run away on Sunday the 6th instant from the South Carolina Railroad Company, their Negro man Sam, recently bought by them, with others at Messrs. Cothran and Sproul's sale at Aiken. He was raised in Cumberland County, North Carolina, and last brought from Richmond, Virginia. In height he is 5 feet 6 3/4 inches, complexion copper color, on the left arm and right leg somewhat scarred, countenance good. The above reward will be paid for his apprehension and lodgment in any of the jails of this or any neighboring state. J. D. Petch, Superintendent of Transportation. Kosciuszko Chronicle, November 4th, 1852. Committed to the jail of Attila County, Mississippi, October the 7th, 1852, a Negro boy who calls his name Hambleton and says he belongs to Parson William Young of Pontotoc County, is about 26 or 27 years old, about 5 feet 8 inches high, rather dark complexion, has 2 or 3 marks on his back, a small scar on his left hip. Had on, when taken up, a pair of blue cotton pants, white cotton drawers, a new cotton shirt, a pair of kip boots, an old cloth cap, and wool hat. The owner is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with as provided in such case. E. B. Sanders, Jailer, A.C. Frankfort Commonwealth, October 21st, 1852. Committed to jail. A Negro boy who calls his name Adam was committed to the Muhlenberg jail on the 24th of July, 1852. Said boy is black, about 16 or 17 years old, 5 feet 8 or 9 inches high, will weigh about 150 pounds. He has lost a part of the finger next to his little finger on the right hand, also the great toe on his left foot. This boy says he belongs to William Mosley, that said Mosley was moving to Mississippi from Virginia. He further states that he is lost and not a runaway. His owner is requested to come forward, prove property, pay expenses, and take him away, or he will be disposed of as the law directs. S.H. Dempsey, J.M.C. Greenville, Kentucky, October 20th, 1852. Runaway slave. A Negro man arrested and placed in the Barron County Jail, Kentucky, on the 21st instant, calling himself Henry, about 22 years old, says he ran away from near Florence, Alabama, and belongs to John Calloway. He is about 5 feet 8 inches high, dark but not very black, rather thin visage, pointed nose, no scars perceivable, rather spare built, says he has been runaway nearly 3 months. The owner can get him by applying and paying the reward and expenses. If not, he will be proceeded against according to law. The 24th of August, 1852, Samuel Adwell, jailer. In the same paper are 2 more poor fellows who probably have been sold to pay jail fees before now. Notice, taken up by M.H. Brand as a runaway slave on the 22nd of last month, in the city of Covington, Kenton County, Kentucky, a Negro man calling himself Charles Warfield, about 30 years old, but looks older, about 6 feet high, no particular marks, had no free papers, but he says he is free, and was born in Pennsylvania and in Fayette County. Said Negro was lodged in jail on the said 22nd of last month, and the owner or owners, if any, are hereby notified to come forward, prove property, and pay charges, and take him away. C.W. Hull, J.K.C. Committed to the jail of Graves County, Kentucky, on the 4th instant, a Negro man calling himself Dave or David. He says he is free, but formerly belonged to Samuel Brown of Prince William County, Virginia. He is of black color, about 5 feet 10 inches high, weighs about 180 pounds, supposed to be about 45 years old, had on brown pants and striped shirt. He had in his possession an old rifle gun, an old pistol, and some old clothing. He also informs me that he has escaped from the Dyersburg Jail, Tennessee, where he had been confined for some 8 or 9 months. The owner is hereby notified to come forward, prove property, pay charges, etc. L.B. Holefield, jailer, G.C. June 28, 1852. Charleston, Mercury, October 29, 1852. $200 reward. Run away from the subscriber sometime in March last, his servant Lydia, and is suspected of being in Charleston. I will give the above reward to any person who may apprehend her and furnish evidence to conviction of the person supposed to harbor her, or $50 for having her lodged in any jail so that I get her. Lydia is a mulatto woman, 25 years of age, 4 feet 11 inches high, with straight black hair, which inclines to curl, her front teeth defective and has been plugged, the gold distinctly seen when talking, round face, a scar under her chin, and 2 fingers on one hand, stiff at the first joints. June 16th, C.T. Scaife. $25 reward. Run away from the subscriber on or about the 1st of May last, his Negro boy George, about 18 years of age, about 5 feet high, well set, and speaks properly. He formerly belonged to Mr. J.D.A. Murphy, living in Blackville, has a mother belonging to Mr. Lorick, living in Lexington District. He is supposed to have a pass, and is likely to be lurking about Branchville or Charleston. The above reward will be paid to any one lodging George in any jail in the state so that I can get him. J.J. Andrews, Orangeburg, C.H. Orangeburg, August 7th, 1852. Notice. Committed to the jail at Colleen District as a runaway, Jordan, a Negro man about 35 years of age, who says he belongs to Dobson Coley of Pulaski County, Georgia. The owner has notice to prove property and take him away. L.W. McCants, Sheriff, Colleton District. Walterboro, South Carolina, September 7, 1852. The following are selected by the Commonwealth, mostly from New Orleans papers. The characteristics of the slaves are interesting. $25 reward will be paid to the undersigned for the apprehension and delivery to any jail in this city of the Negro woman Maria, who ran away from the Phoenix House about the 15th of October last. She is about 45 years old, 5 feet 4 inches high, stout built, speaks French and English, was purchased from Charles de Blanc. H. Bidwell and Company, 16 Front Levee. $50 reward, ran away about the 25th of last month. Allen, a bright mulatto, aged about 22, 6 feet high, very well dressed, has an extremely careless gait, of slender build, and wore a mustache when he left, the property of J.P. Harrison, Esquire, of this city. The above reward will be paid for his safe delivery at any safe place in the city. For further particulars, apply at 10 Bank Place. $100 reward. We will give the above reward for the apprehension of the light mulatto boy Seaborn, aged 20 years, about 5 feet 4 inches high, is stout, well made, and remarkably active. He is somewhat of a circus actor, by which he may easily be detected, as he is always showing his gymnastic qualifications. The said boy absented himself on the 3rd instant. Besides the above reward, all reasonable expenses will be paid. W&H Stackhouse, 70 Tchoupitoulas. $25 reward. The above reward will be paid for the apprehension of the mulatto boy Severin, aged 25, 5 feet 6 or 8 inches high. Most of his front teeth are out, and the letters CV are marked on either of his arms with India ink. He speaks French, English, and Spanish, and was formerly owned by Mr. Courcelle in the 3rd District. I will pay, in addition to the above reward, $50 for such information as will lead to the conviction of any person harboring said slave. John Erman, corner of Camp and Race Streets. $25 reward. Ran away from the chain gang in New Orleans, First Municipality, in February last, a Negro boy named Stephen. He is about 5 feet 7 inches in height, a very light mulatto, with blue eyes and brownish hair, stoops a little in the shoulders, has a cast-down look, and is very strongly built and muscular. He will not acknowledge his name or owner, is an habitual runaway, and was shot somewhere in the ankle while endeavoring to escape from Baton Rouge jail. The above reward, with all attendant expenses, will be paid on his delivery to me or for his apprehension and commitment to any jail from which I can get him. A. L. Bingaman. $25 reward. The above reward will be given to the person who will lodge in one of the jails of this city the slave Sarah, belonging to Mr. Guisenet, corner of St. John Baptiste and Race Streets. Said slave is aged about 28 years, 5 feet high, benevolent face, fine teeth, and speaking French and English. Captains of vessels and steamboats are hereby cautioned not to receive her on board, under penalty of the law. Avett Brothers, corner Bienville and Old Levee Streets. Lynchburg, Virginia, November 6th. $25 reward. Ran away from the subscriber on the Virginia and Tennessee Railroad in the county of Wythe on the 20th of June, 1852, a Negro man named Charles, 6 feet high, copper color with several teeth out in front, about 35 years of age, rather slow to reply, but pleasing appearance when spoken to. He wore, when he left, a cloth cap and a blue cloth sack coat. He was purchased in Tennessee 14 months ago by Mr. M. Connell of Lynchburg, and carried to the place, where he remained until I purchased him 4 months ago. It is more than probable that he will make his way to Tennessee, as he has a wife now living there, or he may perhaps return to Lynchburg and lurk about there, as he has acquaintances there. The above reward will be paid if he is taken in the state and confined so that I can get him again, or I will pay a reward of $40 if taken out of the state and confined in jail. George W. Kyle. Winchester Republican, Virginia, November 26th. $100 reward. ran away from the subscriber near Culpeper Courthouse, Virginia, about the 1st of October. A Negro man named Alfred, about 5 feet 7 inches high, about 25 years of age, uncommonly muscular and active, complexion dark but not black, countenance mild and rather pleasant. He had a boil last winter on the middle joint of the middle or second finger of the right hand, which left the finger stiff in that joint, more visible in opening his hand than in shutting it. He has a wife at Mr. Thomas G. Marshall's, near Farrowsville, in Fauquier County, and may be in that neighborhood, where he wishes to be sold and where I am willing to sell him. I will give the above reward if he is taken out of the state and secured so that I get him again, or $50 if taken in the state and secured in like manner. W. B. Slaughter, October 29th, 1852. From the Louisville Daily Journal, October 23rd, 1852. $100 reward. Ran away from the subscriber in the city on Friday, May 28th, a Negro boy named Wyatt. Said boy is copper-colored, 25 or 26 years old, about 5 feet 11 inches high, of large frame, slow and heavy gait, has very large hands and feet, small side whiskers, a full head of hair which he combs to the side, quite a pleasing look, and is very likely. I recently purchased Wyatt from Mr. Garrett of Garrett's Landing, Kentucky, and his wife is the property of Thomas G. Rowland, Esquire, of this city. I will pay the above reward for the apprehension and delivery of the boy to me if taken out of the state, or $50 if taken in the state. David W. Yandell. $200 reward. 2 Negroes ran away from the subscriber, living in Louisville on the 2nd, one Negro man and girl. The man's name is Miles. He is about 5 feet 8 inches high, dark brown color, with a large scar upon his head as if caused from a burn, age about 25 years, and had with him 2 carpet sacks, one of cloth, the other enameled leather, also a pass from Louisville to Owentown, Owen County, Kentucky, and back. The girl's name is Julia, and she is of a light brown color, short and heavy set, rather good looking, with a scar upon her forehead, had on a plaid silk dress when she left, and took other clothes with her, looks to be about 16 years of age. The above reward will be paid for the man if taken out of the state, or $100 for the girl, $100 for the man if taken in the state, or $50 for the girl. In either event, they are to be secured, so I get them. John W. Lynn. The following advertisements are all dated Shelby County, Kentucky. Jailer's notice. We committed to the jail of Shelby County a Negro woman who says her name is Judah, dark complexion, 20 years of age, some 5 feet high, weighs about 120 pounds, no scars recollected, and says she belongs to James Wilson, living in Denmark, Tennessee. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take her away, or she will be dealt with as the law directs. W. H. Eanes, Jailer, Shelby County. Jailer's notice. We committed to the jail of Shelby County on the 28th of last month a Negro boy who says his name is John W. Lloyd, of a bright complexion, 25 years of age, will weigh about 150 pounds, about 5 feet 9 or 10 inches, 3 scars on his left leg, which was caused by a dog bite. The said John claims to be free. If he has any master, he is hereby notified to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with as the law directs. Also committed at the same time a Negro boy who says his name is Patrick, of a bright complexion, about 30 years of age, will weigh about 145 or 50 pounds, about 6 feet high. His face is very badly scarred, which he says was caused by being salivated. The disease caused him to lose the bone out of his nose and his jawbone also. Says he belongs to Dr. William Cheatham, living in Nashville, Tennessee. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with as the law directs. Also committed at the same time, a Negro boy who says his name is Claiborne, dark complexion, 22 years of age, will weigh about 140 pounds, about 5 feet high, no scars recollected, says he belongs to Colonel Roussel, living in DeSoto County, Mississippi. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with as the law directs. W. H. Eanes, jailer of Shelby County. Jailer's notice. We committed to the jail of Shelby County a Negro boy who says his name is George, dark complexion, about 25 or 30 years of age, some 5 feet 9 or 10 inches high, will weigh about 140 pounds, no scars, and says he belongs to Mallory Bradford, living in Issaquah County, Mississippi. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take him away, or he will be dealt with as the law directs. W. H. Eanes, jailer of Shelby County. Jailer's notice. We committed to the jail of Shelby County on the 30th of last month a Negro woman who says her name is Nancy, of a bright complexion, some 20 or 21 years of age, will weigh about 140 pounds, about 5 feet high, no scars. She says she belongs to John Pittman, living in Memphis, Tennessee. The owner of said slave is requested to come forward, prove property, pay charges, and take her away, or she will be dealt with as the law directs. W. H. Eanes, jailer of Shelby County. Stowe interjects. Negro property is decidedly brisk in this county. Natchez, Mississippi, Free Trader, November 6, 1852. $25 reward. Ran away from the undersigned on the 17th day of October, 1852, a Negro man by the name of Allen, about 23 years old, near 6 feet high, of dark mulatto color, no marks save one, and that caused by the bite of a dog. Had on when he left Lowell pants and cotton shirt, reads imperfect, can make a short calculation correctly, and can write some few words. Said Negro has run away heretofore, and when taken up was in possession of a free pass. He is quick-spoken, lively, and smiles when in conversation. I will give the above reward to anyone who will confine said Negro to any jail so that I can get him. Thomas R. Cheatham. Newberry Sentinel, South Carolina, November 17, 1852. Notice. Ran away from the subscriber on the 9th of July last. My boy William, a bright mulatto, about 26 years old, 5 feet 9 or 10 inches high, of slender make, quite intelligent, speaks quick when spoken to, and walks briskly. Said boy was brought from Virginia and will probably attempt to get back. Any information of said boy will be thankfully received. John M. Mars. Near Molahan, P.O., Newberry District, South Carolina. Raleigh Register and Richmond Enquirer will copy 4 times weekly and send bills to this office. Greensboro, Patriot, North Carolina, November 6th. $10 reward. Ran away from my service in February 1851 a colored man named Edward Winslow, low, thick-set, part Indian, and a first-rate fiddler. Said Winslow was sold out of Guilford Jail at February Court, 1851, for his prison charges for a term of 5 years. It was supposed that he is at work on the railroad somewhere in Davidson County. The above reward will be paid for his apprehension and confinement in the jail of Guilford or any of the adjoining counties so that I get him, or for his delivery to me in the southeast corner of Guilford. My post office is Long's Mills, Randolph, North Carolina. P.C. Smith. October 27, 1852. The New Orleans True Delta of the 11th ult., 1853, has the following editorial notice. The great raffle of a trotting horse and a Negro servant. The enterprising and go-ahead Colonel Jennings has got a raffle under way now, which eclipses all his previous undertakings in that line. The prizes are the celebrated trotting horse Star, buggy and harness, and a valuable Negro servant, the latter valued at $900. See his advertisements in another column. The advertisement is as follows. Raffle. Mr. Joseph Jennings respectfully informs his friends and the public that at the request of many of acquaintances he has been induced to purchase from Mr. Osborne of Missouri the celebrated dark bay horse Star, aged 5 years, square trotter and warranted sound, with a new light trotting buggy and harness, also the stout mulatto girl Sarah, aged about 20 years, general house servant, valued at $900 and guaranteed, will be raffled for at 4:00 p.m. February 1st at any hotel selected by the subscribers. The above is as represented, and those persons who may wish to engage in the usual price of raffling will, I assure them, be perfectly satisfied with their destiny in this affair. 1,500 chances at $1 each. The whole is valued at its just worth, $1,500. The raffle will be conducted by gentlemen selected by the interested subscribers present. 5 nights allowed to complete the raffle. Both of above can be seen at my store, No. 78 Common Street, second door from camp, at from 9:00 a.m. till 2:30 p.m. Highest throw takes the first choice, the lowest throw the remaining prize, and the fortunate winners to pay $25 each for the refreshments furnished for the occasion. January 9th. J. Jennings. Daily Courier, Natchez, Mississippi, November 20th, 1852. $25 reward. The above reward will be given for the apprehension and confinement in any jail of the Negro man Hardy, who ran away from the subscriber, residing on Lake St. John, near Rifle Point, Concordia Parish, Louisiana, on the 9th August last. Hardy is a remarkably likely Negro, entirely free from all marks, scars, or blemishes when he left home, about 6 feet high, of black complexion, though quite light, fine countenance, unusually smooth skin, good head of hair, fine eyes and teeth. Address this subscriber at Rifle Point, Concordia Parish, Louisiana. Robert Y. Jones. Stowe's comment. What an unfortunate master! Lost an article entirely free from marks, scars, and blemishes. Such a rarity ought to be choice. Savannah Daily Georgian, 6th September, 1852. Arrested. About 3 weeks ago, under suspicious circumstances, a Negro woman who calls herself Phoebe, or Phyllis, says she is free, and lately from Beaufort District, South Carolina. Said woman is about 50 years of age, stout in stature, mild-spoken, 5 feet 4 inches high, and weighs about 140 pounds. Having made diligent inquiry by letter, and from what I can learn, said woman is a runaway. Any person owning said slave can get her by making application to me, properly authenticated. Waring Russell, County Constable. Savannah, October 25th, 1852. $250 reward. Ran away from Sparta, Georgia, about the 1st of last year, my boy George. He is a good carpenter, about 35 years, a bright mulatto, tall and quite likely. He was brought about 3 years ago from St. Mary's, and had, when he ran away, a wife there, or near there, belonging to a Mr. Holzendorf. I think he has told me he has been about Macon also. He had, and perhaps still has, a brother in Savannah. He is very intelligent. I will give the above reward for his confinement in some jail in the state, so that I can get him. Refer, for any further information, to Rabin and Whitehead, Savannah, Georgia. W.J. Sassonet. Oxford, Georgia, August 13, 1852. Back to Stowe's comments. From these advertisements and hundreds of similar ones, one may learn the following things. 1. That the arguments for the enslaving of the Negro do not apply to a large part of the actual slaves. 2. That they are not, in the estimation of their masters, very stupid. 3. That they are not remarkably contented. 4. That they have no particular reason to be so. 5. That multitudes of men claiming to be free are constantly being sold into slavery. In respect to the complexion of these slaves, there are some points worthy of consideration. The writer adds the following advertisements, published by William I. Bowditch, Esquire, in his pamphlet, Slavery and the Constitution. From the Richmond, Virginia Whig. $100 reward will be given for the apprehension of my Negro, Edmund Kenny. He has straight hair and complexion so nearly white that it is believed a stranger would suppose there was no African blood in him. He was with my boy Dick a short time since in Norfolk, and offered him for sale, and was apprehended, but escaped under pretense of being a white man. Anderson Bowles, January 6, 1836. From the Republican Banner and Nashville Whig of July 4, 1849, $200 reward. Ran away from the subscriber on the 23rd of June last, a bright mulatto woman named Julia, about 25 years of age. She is of common size, nearly white, and very likely. She is a good seamstress and can read a little. She may attempt to pass for white. Dress is fine. She took with her Anna, her child, 8 or 9 years old, and considerably darker than her mother. She once belonged to a Mr. Helm of Columbia, Tennessee. I will give a reward of $50 for said Negro and child, if delivered to me, or confined in any jail in this state, so I can get them. $100 if caught in any other slave state, and confined in a jail so that I can get them, and $200 if caught in any free state, and put in any good jail in Kentucky or Tennessee, so I can get them. A. W. Johnson. Nashville, July 9, 1849. The following 3 advertisements are taken from Alabama papers. Ran away. From the subscriber, working on the plantation of Colonel H. Tinker, a bright mulatto boy named Alfred. Alfred is about 18 years old, pretty well grown, has blue eyes, light flaxen hair, skin disposed to freckle. He will try to pass as free-born. Greene County, Alabama, S.G. Stewart. $100 reward. Ran away from the subscriber, a bright mulatto man-slave named Sam. Light, sandy hair, blue eyes, ruddy complexion, is so white as very easily to pass for a free white man. Edwin Peck, Mobile, April 22, 1837. Ran away on the 15th of May from me a Negro woman named Fanny. Said woman is 20 years old, is rather tall, can read and write, and so forge passes for herself. Carried away with her a pair of earrings, a Bible with a red cover, is very pious. She prays a great deal, and was, as supposed, contented and happy. She is as white as most white women, with straight, light hair and blue eyes, and can pass herself for a white woman. I will give $500 for her apprehension and delivery to me. She is very intelligent. Tuscaloosa, May 29, 1845. John Balch. From the New Bern, North Carolina Spectator. $50 reward. Will be given for the apprehension and delivery to me of the following slaves: Samuel and Judy his wife, with their 4 children, belonging to the estate of Sacker Dubberly, deceased. I will give $10 for the apprehension of William Dubberly, a slave belonging to the estate. William is about 19 years old, quite white, and would not readily be taken for a slave. John J. Lane. March 13, 1837. The next 2 advertisements we cut from the New Orleans Picayune of September 2, 1846. $25 reward. Ran away from the plantation of Madame Fergus du Plantier on or about the 27th of June, 1846. A bright mulatto named Ned, very stout-built, about 5 feet 11 inches high, speaks English and French, about 35 years old, waddles in his walk. He may try to pass himself for a white man, as he is of a very clear color and has sandy hair. The above reward will be paid to whoever will bring him to Madame du Plantier's plantation, Manchac, or lodge him in some jail where he can be conveniently obtained. $200 reward. Ran away from the subscriber last November, a white Negro man, about 35 years old, height about 5 feet 8 or 10 inches, blue eyes, has a yellow woolly head, very fair skin. Stowe's comments. These are the characteristics of three races. The copper-colored complexion shows the Indian blood. The others are the mixed races of Negroes and whites. It is known that the poor remains of Indian races have been in many cases forced into slavery. It is no less certain that white children have sometimes been kidnapped and sold into slavery. Reverend George Bourne of Virginia, Presbyterian minister, who wrote against slavery there as early as 1816, gives an account of a boy who was stolen from his parents at 7 years of age, immersed in a tan vat to change his complexion, tattooed and sold, and after a captivity of 14 years, succeeded in escaping. The tanning process is not necessary now, as a fair skin is no presumption against slavery. There is reason to think that the grandmother of poor Emily Russell was a white child stolen by kidnappers. That kidnappers may steal and sell white children at the South now is evident from these advertisements. This writer, within a week, has seen a fugitive quadroon mother who had with her 2 children, a boy of 10 months and a girl of 3 years. Both were surpassingly fair and uncommonly beautiful. The girl had blue eyes and golden hair. The mother and those children were about to be sold for the division of an estate, which was the reason why she fled. When the mind once becomes familiarized with the process of slavery, of enslaving first black, then Indian, then mulatto, then quadroon, and when blue eyes and golden hair are advertised as properties of Negroes, what protection will there be for poor white people, especially as under the present fugitive law they can be carried away without a jury trial? A governor of South Carolina openly declared in 1835 that the laboring population of any country, bleached or unbleached, were a dangerous element unless reduced to slavery. Will not this be the result, then? End of Part 3, Chapter 9. Slaves as They Are, on Testimony of Owners. Part 3, Chapter 10 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Chapter 10, Part 1 of 2, Poor White Trash. When the public sentiment of Europe speaks in tones of indignation of the system of American slavery, the common reply has been, "Look at your own lower classes." The apologists of slavery have pointed England to her own poor. They have spoken of the heathenish ignorance, the vice, the darkness of her crowded cities, nay, even of her agricultural districts. Now, in the first place, a country where the population is not crowded, where the resources of the soil are more than sufficient for the inhabitants, a country of recent origin, not burdened with the worn-out institutions and clumsy lumber of past ages, ought not to be satisfied to do only as well as countries which have to struggle against all these evils. It is a poor defense for America to say to older countries, "We're no worse than you are." She ought to be infinitely better. But it will appear that the institution of slavery has produced not only heathenish, degraded, miserable slaves, but it produces a class of white people who are, by universal admission, more heathenish, degraded, and miserable. The institution of slavery has accomplished the double feat in America, not only of degrading and brutalizing her black working classes, but of producing, notwithstanding a fertile soil and abundant room, a poor white population as degraded and brutal as ever existed in any of the most crowded districts of Europe. The way that it is done can be made apparent in a few words. 1. The distribution of the land into large plantations and the consequent sparseness of settlement make any system of common school education impracticable. 2. The same cause operates with regard to preaching of the gospel. 3. The degradation of the idea of labor, which results inevitably from enslaving the working class, operates to a great extent in preventing respectable working men of the middling classes from settling or remaining in slave states. where carpenters, blacksmiths, and masons are advertised every week with their own tools or in company with horses, hogs, and other cattle, there is necessarily such an estimate of the laboring class that intelligent, self-respecting mechanics, such as abound in the free states, must find much that is annoying and disagreeable. They may endure it for a time, but with much uneasiness, and they are glad of the first opportunity of immigration. Then again, the filling up of all branches of mechanics and agriculture with slave labor necessarily depresses free labor. Suppose now a family of poor whites in Carolina or Virginia, and the same family in Vermont or Maine. How different the influences that come over them. In Vermont or Maine, the children have the means of education at hand in public schools, and they have all around them in society avenues of success that require only industry to make them available. The boys have their choice among all the different trades for which the organization of free society makes a steady demand. The girls, animated by the spirit of the land in which they are born, think useful labor no disgrace, and find, with true female ingenuity, 100 ways of adding to the family stock. If there be one member of a family in whom diviner gifts and higher longings seem a call for a more finished course of education, then cheerfully the whole family unites its productive industry to give that one the wider education which his wider genius demands, and thus have been given to the world such men as Roger Sherman and Daniel Webster. But take this same family and plant them in South Carolina or Virginia, how different the result. No common school opens its doors to their children. The only church, perhaps, is 15 miles off, over a bad road. The whole atmosphere of the country in which they are born associates degradation and slavery with useful labor, and the only standard of gentility is ability to live without work. What branch of useful labor opens a way to its sons? Would he be a blacksmith? The planters around him prefer to buy their blacksmiths in Virginia. Would he be a carpenter? Each planter in his neighborhood owns one or two now. And so coopers and masons. Who would be a shoemaker? The plantation shoes are made in Lynn and Natick, towns of New England. In fact, between the free labor of the North and the slave labor of the South, there is nothing for a poor white to do. Without schools or churches, these miserable families grow up heathen on a Christian soil, in idleness, vice, dirt, and discomfort of all sorts. They are the pest of the neighborhood, the scoff and contempt or pity even of the slaves. The expressive phrase, so common in the mouths of the Negroes, of "po' white trash," says all for this luckless race of beings that can be said. From this class spring a tribe of keepers of small groggeries, and dealers, by a kind of contraband trade, with the Negroes in the stolen produce of plantations. Thriving and promising sons may perhaps hope to grow up into Negro traders, and thence be exalted into overseers of plantations. The utmost stretch of ambition is to compass money enough, by any of a variety of nondescript measures, to buy a nigger or two, and begin to appear like other folks. Woe betide the unfortunate Negro man or woman, carefully raised in some good religious family, when an execution or the death of their proprietors throws them into the market, and they are bought by a master and mistress of this class. Oftentimes the slave is infinitely the superior in every respect, in person, manners, education, and morals, but for all that the law guards the despotic authority of the owner quite as jealously. From all that would appear, in the case of Souther, which we have recorded, he must have been one of this class. We have certain indications in the evidence that the 2 white witnesses who spent the whole day in gaping, unresisting survey of his diabolical proceedings were men of this order. It appears that the crime alleged against the poor victim was that of getting drunk and trading with these 2 very men, and that they were sent for probably by way of showing them what a nigger would get by trading with them. This circumstance at once marks them out as belonging to that band of half-contraband traders who spring up among the mean whites and occasion owners of slaves so much inconvenience by dealing with their hands. Can any words so forcibly show what sort of white men these are as the idea of their standing in stupid, brutal curiosity a whole day as witnesses in such a hellish scene? Conceive the misery of the slave who falls into the hands of such masters. A clergyman, now dead, communicated to this writer the following anecdote. In traveling in one of the Southern states, he put up for the night in a miserable log shanty, kept by a man of this class. All was dirt, discomfort, and utter barbarism. The man, his wife, and their stock of wild, neglected children drank whiskey, loafed, and predominated over the miserable man and woman who did all the work and bore all the caprices of the whole establishment. He, the gentleman, was not long in discovering that these slaves were in person, language, and in every respect superior to their owners, and all that he could get of comfort in the miserable abode was owing to their ministrations. Before he went away, they contrived to have a private interview, and begged him to buy them. They told him that they had been decently brought up in a respectable and refined family, and that their bondage was therefore the more inexpressibly galling. The poor creatures had waited on him with most assiduous care, tending his horse, brushing his boots, and anticipating all his wants, in the hope of inducing him to buy them. The clergyman said that he never so wished for money as when he saw the dejected visages with which they listened to his assurances that he was too poor to comply with their desires. This miserable class of whites form in all the Southern states a material for the most horrible and ferocious of mobs. Utterly ignorant and inconceivably brutal, they are like some blind, savage monster which, when aroused, tramples heedlessly over everything in its way. Singular as it may appear, though slavery is the cause of the misery and degradation of this class, yet they are the most vehement and ferocious advocates of slavery. The reason is this. They feel the scorn of the upper classes, and their only means of consolation is in having a class below them, whom they may scorn in turn. To set the Negro at liberty would deprive them of this last comfort, and accordingly no class of men advocates slavery with such frantic and unreasoning violence, or hate abolitionists with such demonic hatred. Let the reader conceive of a mob of men as brutal and callous as the two white witnesses of the Souther tragedy, led on by men like Souther himself, and he will have some idea of the materials which occur in the worst kind of Southern mobs. The leaders of the community, those men who play on other men with as little care for them as a harper plays on a harp, keep this blind, furious monster of the mob very much as an overseer keeps plantation dogs, as creatures to be set on to any man or thing whom he may choose to have put down. These leading men have used the cry of abolitionism over the mob, much as a huntsman uses the set on to his dogs. Whenever they have a purpose to carry, a man to put down, they have only to raise this cry, and the monster is wide awake, ready to spring wherever they shall send him. Does a minister raise his voice in favor of the slave? Immediately, with a whoop and a hurrah, some editor starts the mob on him as an abolitionist. Is there a man teaching his Negroes to read? The mob is started upon him. He must promise to give it up or leave the state. Does a man at a public hotel table express his approbation of some anti-slavery work? Up come the police and arrest him for seditious language. Footnote: the writer is describing here a scene of recent occurrence in a slave state, of whose particulars she has the best means of knowledge. The work in question was Uncle Tom's Cabin. End of footnote. And on the heels of the police thronging round the justice offices come the ever-ready mob, men with clubs and bowie knives, swearing that they will have his heart's blood. The more respectable citizens in vain try to compose them. It is quite as hopeful to reason with a pack of hounds, and the only way is to smuggle the suspected person out of the state as quickly as possible. All these are scenes of common occurrence at the South. Every Southern man knows them to be so, and they know, too, the reason why they are so. But so much do they fear the monster that they dare not say what they know. This brute monster sometimes gets beyond the power of his masters, and then results ensue most mortifying to the patriotism of honorable Southern men, but which they are powerless to prevent. Such was the case when the Honorable Senator Hoar of Massachusetts, with his daughter, visited the city of Charleston. The senator was appointed by the sovereign state of Massachusetts to inquire into the condition of her free-colored citizens detained in South Carolina prisons. We cannot suppose that men of honor and education in South Carolina can contemplate without chagrin the fact that this honorable gentleman, the representative of a sister state, and accompanied by his daughter, was obliged to flee from South Carolina because they were told that the constituted authorities would not be powerful enough to protect them from the ferocities of a mob. This is not the only case in which this mob power has escaped from the hands of its guiders and produced mortifying results. The scenes of Vicksburg and the succession of popular whirlwinds which at that time flew over the southwestern states have been forcibly painted by the author of The White Slave. They who find these popular outbreaks useful when they serve their own turns are sometimes forcibly reminded of the consequences, as in this quotation from Samuel Butler's Hudibras, of letting rapine loose and murder to go just so far and no further, and setting all the land on fire to burn just so high and no higher. The statements made above can be substantiated by various documents, mostly by the testimony of residents in slave states and by extracts from their newspapers. Concerning the class of poor whites, Mr. William Gregg of Charleston, South Carolina, in a pamphlet called Essays on Domestic Industry, or An Inquiry into the Expediency of Establishing Cotton Manufactories in South Carolina, 1845, says on page 22, quote, "Shall we pass unnoticed the thousands of poor, ignorant, degraded white people among us who, in this land of plenty, live in comparative nakedness and starvation? Many a one is reared in proud South Carolina from birth to manhood, who has never passed a month in which he has not, some part of the time, been stinted for meat. Many a mother is there who will tell you that her children are but scantily provided with bread, and much more scantily with meat, and if they be clad with comfortable raiment, it is at the expense of these scanty allowances of food. These may be startling statements, but they are nevertheless true, and if not believed in Charleston, the members of our legislature who have traversed the state in electioneering campaigns can attest their truth." End quote. The Reverend Henry Duffner, D.D., president of Lexington College, Virginia, himself a slaveholder, published in 1847 an address to the people of Virginia, showing that slavery is injurious to public welfare, in which he shows the influence of slavery in producing a decrease of the white population. He says, quote, "It appears that in the 10 years from 1830 to 1840, Virginia lost by immigration no fewer than 375,000 of her people, of whom East Virginia lost 304,000 and West Virginia 71,000. At this rate, Virginia supplies the West every 10 years with a population equal in number to the population of the state of Mississippi in 1840. She has sent, or we should rather say, she has driven from her soil at least 1/3 of all the immigrants who have gone from the old states to the new. More than another third have gone from the other old slave states. Many of these multitudes who have left the slave states have shunned the regions of slavery and settled in the free countries of the West. These were generally industrious and enterprising white men, who found by sad experience that a country of slaves was not the country for them. It is a truth, a certain truth, that slavery drives free laborers, farmers, mechanics, and all, and some of the best of them too, out of the country, and fills their places with Negroes. Even the common mechanical trades do not flourish in a slave state. Some mechanical operations must indeed be performed in every civilized country, but the general rule in the South is to import from abroad every fabricated thing that can be carried in ships, such as household furniture, boats, boards, lathes, carts, plows, axes, and axe helves, besides innumerable other things, which free communities are accustomed to make for themselves. What is most wonderful is that the forests and iron mines of the South supply in great part the materials out of which these things are made. The northern freemen come with their ships, carry home the timber and pig iron, work them up, supply their own wants with a part, and then sell the rest at a good profit in the southern markets. Now, although mechanics, by setting up their shops in the South, could save all these freights and profits, yet so it is that northern mechanics will not settle in the South, and the southern mechanics are undersold by their northern competitors." End quote. In regard to education, Reverend Theodore Parker gives the following statistics in his Letters on Slavery, page 65. Quote, "In 1671, Sir William Berkeley, governor of Virginia, said, 'I thank God that there are no free schools nor printing presses in Virginia, and I hope we shall not have them these 100 years.' In 1840, in the 15 slave states and territories, there were at the various primary schools 201,085 scholars. At the various primary schools of the free states, 1,626,028 scholars. The state of Ohio alone had at her primary schools 17,524 more scholars than all the 15 slave states. New York alone had 301,282 more. In the slave states, there are 1,368,325 free white children between the ages of 5 and 20. In the free states, 3,536,689 such children. In the slave states, at schools and colleges, there are 301,172 pupils. In the free states, 2,212,444 pupils at schools or colleges. Thus, in the slave states, out of 25 free white children between 5 and 20, there are not quite 5 at any school or college, while out of 25 such children in the free states, there are more than 15 at school or college. In the slave states, of the free white population that is over 20 years of age, there is almost 1/10 part that are unable to read and write, while in the free states there is not quite 1 in 156 who is deficient to that degree. In New England there are but few born therein and more than 20 years of age who are unable to read and write, but many foreigners arrive there with no education, and thus swell the number of the illiterate and diminish the apparent effect of her free institutions. The South has few such immigrants. The ignorance of the Southern states, therefore, is to be ascribed to other causes. The Northern men who settle in the slave-holding states have perhaps about the average culture of the North, and more than that of the South. The South, therefore, gains educationally from immigration as the North loses. Among the Northern states, Connecticut, among the Southern states, South Carolina, are to a great degree free from disturbing influences of this character. A comparison between the two will show the relative effects of the respective institutions of the North and South. In Connecticut, there are 163,843 free persons over 20 years of age. In South Carolina, but 111,663. In Connecticut, there are but 526 persons over 20 who are unable to read and write, while in South Carolina there are 20,615 free white persons over 20 years of age unable to read and write. In South Carolina, out of each 626 free whites more than 20 years of age, there are more than 58 wholly unable to read or write. Out of that number of such persons in Connecticut, not quite 2. More than the 1/6 part of the adult freemen of South Carolina are unable to read the vote which will be deposited at the next election. It is but fair to infer that at least 1/3 of the adults of South Carolina, if not of much of the South, are unable to read and understand even a newspaper. Indeed, in one of the slave states, that is not a matter of mere inference, for in 1837 Governor Clark of Kentucky declared in his message to the legislature that 1/3 of the adult population were unable to write their names. Yet Kentucky has a school fund valued at $1,221,819, while South Carolina has none. One sign of this want of ability even to read in the slave states is too striking to be passed on. The staple reading of the least cultivated Americans is the newspapers, one of the lowest forms of literature, though one of the most powerful, read even by men who read nothing else. In the slave states there are published but 377 newspapers, and in the free states 1,135. These numbers do not express the entire difference in the case, for as a general rule, the circulation of the Southern newspapers is 50 to 75% less than that of the North. Suppose, however, that each Southern newspaper has 2/3 the circulation of a Northern journal. We have then but 225 newspapers for the slave states. The more valuable journals, the monthlies and quarterlies, are published almost entirely in the free states. The number of churches, the number and character of the clergy who labor for these churches are other measures of the intellectual and moral condition of the people. The scientific character of the Southern clergy has been already touched on. Let us compare the more external facts. In 1830, South Carolina had a population of 581,185 souls, Connecticut 297,675 souls. In 1836, South Carolina had 364 ministers, Connecticut 498. In 1834, there were in the slave states but 82,532 scholars in the Sunday schools, in the free states 504,835. In the single state of New York, 161,768. End of Theodore Parker's citation. The fact of constant immigration from slave states is also shown by such extracts from papers as the following from the Raleigh, North Carolina Register, quoted in the columns of the National Era. They will leave North Carolina. Our attention was arrested on Saturday last by quite a long train of wagons winding through our streets, which upon inquiry we found to belong to a party emigrating from Wayne County in this state to the far west. This is but a repetition of similar scenes that we and others have witnessed during the past few years, and such spectacles will be still more frequently witnessed unless something is done to retrieve our fallen fortunes at home. If there be any one consummation devoutly to be wished in our policy, it is that our young men should remain at home and not abandon their native state. From the early settlement of North Carolina, the great drain upon her prosperity has been the spirit of immigration, which has so prejudicially affected all the states of the South. Her sons, hitherto neglected, if we must say it, by an unparental government, have wended their way by hundreds upon hundreds from the land of their fathers, that land, too, to make it a paradise, wanting nothing but a market, to bury their bones in the land of strangers. We firmly believe that this immigration is caused by the laggard policy of our people on the subject of internal improvement, for man is not prone by nature to desert the home of his affections." End quote. The editor of the Era also quotes the following from the Greensboro, Alabama, Beacon. An unusually large number of movers have passed through this village within the past 2 or 3 weeks. On one day of last week, upwards of 30 wagons and other vehicles belonging to immigrants, mostly from Georgia and South Carolina, passed through on their way, most of them bound to Texas and Arkansas. End quote. This tide of immigration does not emanate from an overflowing population, very far from it. Rather, it marks an abandonment of the soil which, exhausted by injudicious culture, will no longer repay the labor of tillage. The immigrant, turning his back upon the homes of his childhood, leaves a desolate region, it may be, and finds that he can indulge in his feelings of local attachment only at the risk of starvation. How are the older states of the South to keep their population? We say nothing of an increase, but how are they to hold their own? It is useless to talk about strict construction, states' rights, or Wilmot provisos. Of what avail can such things be in a sterile desert upon which people cannot subsist? This ends Chapter 10, Part 1 of 2, Poor White Trash. Part 3, Chapter 10 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. This recording by Michele Fry, Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Chapter 10, Part 2 of 2, Poor White Trash. In the columns of the National Era, October 2, 1851, also is the following article by its editor: Stand Your Ground. A citizen of Guilford County, North Carolina, in a letter to the True Wesleyan, dated August 20th, 1851, writes, quote, "You may discontinue my paper for the present, as I am inclined to go westward, where I can enjoy religious liberty and have my family in a free country. Mobocracy has the ascendancy here, and there is no law. Brother Wilson had an appointment on Liberty Hill on Sabbath 24th instant. The mob came armed according to mob law and commenced operations on the meeting house. They knocked all the weatherboarding off, destroying doors, windows, pulpit, and benches, and I have no idea that if the mob was to kill a Wesleyan or one of their friends, that they would be hung. There is more moving this fall to the far west than was ever known in 1 year. People do not like to be made slaves, and they are determined to go where it is no crime to plead the cause of the poor and oppressed. They have become alarmed at seeing the laws of God trampled underfoot with impunity, and that too by legislators, sworn officers of the peace, and professors of religion. And even ministers, so-called, are justifying mobocracy. They think that such a course of conduct will lead to a dissolution of the Union, and then every man will have to fight in defense of slavery or be killed. This is an awful state of things, and if the people were destitute of the Bible and the various means of information which they possess, there might be some hope of reform. But there is but little hope under existing circumstances." End quote. We hope the writer will reconsider his purpose. In his section of North Carolina, there are very many anti-slavery men, and the majority of the people have no interest in what is called slave property. Let them stand their ground and maintain the right of free discussion. How is the despotism of slavery to be put down if those opposed to it abandon their rights and flee their country? Let them do as the indomitable Clay does in Kentucky, and they will make themselves respected. The following is quoted without comment in the National Era in 1851 from the columns of the Augusta Republic, Georgia. Freedom of Speech in Georgia, Warrenton, Georgia, Thursday, July 10, 1851. Quote, "This day the citizens of the town and county met in the courthouse at 8:00 a.m. On motion, Thomas F. Parsons, Esquire, was called to the chair, and Mr. William H. Pilcher requested to act as secretary. The object of the meeting was stated by the chairman as follows: Whereas our community has been thrown into confusion by the presence among us of one Nathan Bird Watson, who hails from New Haven, Connecticut, and who has been promulgating abolition sentiments, publicly and privately, among our people, sentiments at war with our institutions and intolerable in a slave community, and also been detected in visiting suspicious Negro houses, as we suppose for the purpose of inciting our slaves and free Negro population to insurrection and insubordination. The meeting having been organized, William Gibson, Esquire, offered the following resolution, which, after various expressions of opinion, was unanimously adopted, to wit: resolved that a committee of 10 be appointed by the chairman for the purpose of making arrangements to expel Nathan Bird Watson, an avowed abolitionist, who has been in our village for 3 or 4 weeks, by 12 o'clock this day by the Georgian railroad cars, and that it shall be the duty of said committee to escort the said Watson to Camac for the purpose of shipment to his native land. The following gentlemen were named as that committee: William Gibson, E. Cody, J. M. Roberts, J. B. Huff, E. H. Pottle, E. A. Brinkley, John C. Jennings, George W. Dixon, A. B. Rogers, and Dr. R. W. Hubert. On motion, the chairman was added to that committee. It was, on motion, resolved that the proceedings of this meeting, with a minute description of the said Watson, be forwarded to the publishers of the Augusta papers, with the request that they and all other publishers of papers in the slaveholding states publish the same for a sufficient length of time. Description: the said Nathan Bird Watson is a man of dark complexion, hazel eyes, black hair, and wears a heavy beard, measures 5 feet 11 3/4 inches, has a quick step, and walks with his toes inclined inward, and a little stoop-shouldered, now wears a checked coat and white pants, says he is 23 years of age, but will pass for 25 or 30. On motion, the meeting was adjourned. Thomas F. Parsons, Chairman. William H. Pilcher, Secretary. End quote. This may be regarded as a specimen of that kind of editorial halloo which is designed to rouse and start in pursuit of a man the bloodhounds of the mob. The following is copied by the National Era from the Richmond Times. Lynch Law. Quote, on the 13th instant, the Vigilance Committee of the County of Grayson in this state arrested a man named John Cornute, a friend and follower of Bacon, the Ohio abolitionist, and after examining the evidence against him, required him to renounce his abolition sentiments. This Cornute refused to do. Thereupon he was stripped, tied to a tree, and whipped. After receiving a dozen stripes, he caved in and promised not only to recant, but to sell his property in the county, consisting of land and Negroes, and leave the state. Great excitement prevailed throughout the country, and the Wytheville Republican of the 20th instant states that the Vigilance Committee of Grayson were in hot pursuit of other obnoxious persons. On this outrage, the Wytheville Republican makes the following comments, quote, laying aside the white man, humanity to the Negro, the slave, demands that these abolitionists be dealt with summarily and above the law. On Saturday the 13th, we learned that the Committee of Vigilance of that county, to the number of near 200, had before them one John Cornute, a citizen, a friend and backer of Bacon, and promulgator of his abolition doctrines. They required him to renounce abolitionism and promise obedience to the laws. He refused. They stripped him, tied him to a tree, and appealed to him again to renounce and promise obedience to the laws. He refused. The rod was brought, 1, 2, 3, and on to 12 on the bare back, and he cried out. He promised, and more he said he would sell and leave. This Mr. Cornute owns land, Negroes, and money, say $15,000 to $20,000. He has a wife, but no white children. He has among his Negroes some born on his farm, of mixed blood. He is believed to be a friend of the Negro, even to amalgamation. He intends to set his Negroes free and make them his heirs. It is hoped he will retire to Ohio and there finish his operations of amalgamation and emancipation. The vigilance committees were after another of Bacon's men on Thursday. We have not heard whether they caught him nor what followed. There are not more than 6 of his followers that adhere. The rest have renounced him and are much outraged at his imposition. End quote. Mr. Cornute appealed for redress to the law. The result of his appeal is thus stated in the Richmond, Virginia Times, quoted by the National Era. More trouble in Grayson. The clerk of Grayson County Court having on the 1st instant, the first day of Judge Brown's term, tendered his resignation, and there being no applicant for the office, and it being publicly stated at the bar that no one would accept said appointment, Judge Brown found himself unable to proceed with business, and accordingly adjourned the court until the first day of the next term. Immediately upon the adjournment of the court, a public meeting of the citizens of the county was held, when resolutions were adopted expressive of the determination of the people to maintain the stand recently taken, exhorting the committees of vigilance to increased activities in ferreting out all persons tinctured with abolitionism in the county, and offering a reward of $100 for the apprehension and delivery of one Jonathan Roberts to any one of the committees of vigilance. We have a letter from a creditable correspondent in Carroll County, which gives to the affair a still more serious aspect. Trusting that there may be some error about it, we have no comments to make until the facts are known with certainty. Our correspondent, whose letter bears the date of the 13th instant, says, quote, "I learned from an authentic source that the circuit court that was to sit in Grayson County during last week was dissolved by violence. The circumstances were these. After the execution of the Negroes in that county, some time ago, who had been excited to rebellion by a certain Methodist preacher by the name of Bacon, of which you have heard, the citizens held a meeting and instituted a sort of inquisition to find out, if possible, who were the accomplices of said Bacon. Suspicion soon rested on a man by the name of Cornute, and on being charged with being an accomplice, he acknowledged the fact, and declared his intention of persevering in the cause, upon which he was severely lynched. Cornute then instituted suit against the parties, who afterwards held a meeting and passed resolutions notifying the court and lawyers not to undertake the case, upon pain of a coat of tar and feathers. The court, however, convened at the appointed time, and, true to their promise, a band of armed men marched around the courthouse, fired their guns by platoons, and dispersed the court in confusion. There was no blood shed. This county and the county of Wythe have held meetings and passed resolutions sustaining the movement of the citizens of Grayson." End quote. Is it any wonder that people emigrate from states where such things go on? The following accounts will show what ministers of the gospel will have to encounter who undertake faithfully to express their sentiments in slave states. The first is an article by Dr. Bailey of the Era of April 3, 1852. Lynching in Kentucky. The American Baptist of Utica, New York, publishes letters from the Reverend Edward Matthews giving an account of his barbarous treatment in Kentucky. Mr. Matthews, it seems, is an agent of the American Free Mission Society, and in the exercise of his agency visited that state and took occasion to advocate from the pulpit anti-slavery sentiments. Not long since, in the village of Richmond, Madison County, he applied to several churches for permission to lecture on the moral and religious condition of the slaves, but was unsuccessful. February 1st, in the evening, he preached to the colored congregation of that place, after which he was assailed by the mob and driven from the town. Returning in a short time, he left a communication respecting the transaction at the office of the Richmond Chronicle, and again departed. But he had not gone far before he was overtaken by 4 men, who seized him and led him to an out-of-the-way place, where they consulted as to what they should do with him. They resolved to duck him, ascertaining first that he could swim. 2 of them took him and threw him into a pond as far as they could, and on his rising to the surface bade him come out. He did so, and on his refusing to promise never to come to Richmond, they flung him in again. This operation was repeated 4 times, when he yielded. They next demanded of him a promise that he would leave Kentucky and never return again. He refused to give it, and they threw him in the water 6 times more, when, his strength failing, and they threatening to whip him, he gave the pledge required and left the state. We do not know anything about Mr. Matthews or his mode of promulgating his views. The laws of Kentucky for the protection of what is called slave property are stringent enough, and nobody can doubt the readiness of public sentiment to enforce their heaviest penalties against offenders. If Mr. Matthews violated the law, he should have been tried by the law, and he would have been had he committed an illegal act. No charge of the kind is made against him. He was then the victim of lynch law, administered in a ruffianly manner and without provocation, and the parties concerned in the transaction, whatever their position in society, were guilty of conduct as cowardly as it was brutal. As to the manner in which Mr. Matthews conducted himself in Kentucky, we know nothing. We transfer to our columns the following extract from an editorial in the Journal and Messenger of Cincinnati, a Baptist paper, and which it may be presumed speaks intelligently on the subject. Quote, Mr. Matthews is likewise a Baptist minister whose ostensible mission is one of love. If he has violated that mission or any law, he is amenable to God and law, and not to lawless violence. His going to Kentucky is a matter of conscience to him, in which he has a right to indulge. Many good anti-slavery men would question the wisdom of such a step. None would doubt his right. Many, as a matter of taste and propriety, cannot admire the way in which he is reputed to do his work. But they believe he is conscientious, and they know that oppression maketh even a wise man mad. We do not think, in obedience to Christ's commands, he sufficiently counted the cost. For no one in his position should go to Kentucky to agitate the question of slavery unless he expects to die. No man in this position which Mr. Matthews occupies can do it without falling a martyr. Liberty of speech and thought is not, cannot be enjoyed in the slave states. Slavery could not exist for a moment if it did. It is doubtless the duty of the Christian not to surrender his life cheaply for the sake of being a martyr. This would be an unholy motive. It is his duty to preserve it until the last moment. So Christ enjoins. It is no mark of cowardice to flee. When they persecute you in one city, flee into another, said the Savior. But he did not say, give a pledge that you will not exercise your rights. Hence he nor his disciples never did it. But it is a question, after one has deliberated and conscientiously entered a community in the exercise of his constitutional and religious rights, whether he should give a pledge under the influence of a love of life never to return. If he does, he has not counted the cost. A Christian should be as conscientious in pledging solemnly not to do what he has undoubted right to do as he is in laboring for the emancipation of the slave. End quote. Now the following is from the National Era, July 10th, 1851. Mr. McBride wishes to form a church of non-slaveholders. Case of Reverend Jesse McBride. This missionary, it will be remembered, was expelled lately from the state of North Carolina. We give below his letter detailing the conduct of the mob. His letter is dated Guilford, May 6th. After writing that he is suffering from temporary illness, he proceeds, quote, I would have kept within doors this day, but for the fact that I mistrusted a mob would be out to disturb my congregation, though such a hint had not been given me by a human being. About 6 o'clock this morning, I crawled into my carriage and drove 18 miles, which brought me to my meeting place, 8 miles east of Greensboro. The place I gave an account of a few weeks since, where some 7 or 8 persons gave their names to go into the organization of a Wesleyan Methodist church. Well, sure enough, just before meeting time at 12 o'clock, I was informed that a pack of rioters were on hand, and that they had sworn I should not fulfill my appointment this day. As they had heard nothing of this before, the news came upon some of my friends like a clap of thunder from a clear sky. They scarcely knew what to do. I told them I should go to meeting or die in the attempt, and like good soldiers, they followed. Just before I got to the arbor, I saw a man leave the crowd and approach me at the left of my path. As I was about to pass, he said, Mr. McBride, here's a letter for you. I took the letter, put it into my pocket, and said, "I have not time to read it until after the meeting." "No, you must read it now." Seeing that I did not stop, he said, "I want to speak to you," beckoning with his hand and turning, expecting me to follow. "I will talk to you after the meeting," I said, pulling out my watch. "You see, I have no time to spare. It is just 12. As I went to go in at the door of the stand, a man who had taken his seat on the step rose up, placed his hand on me, and said in a very excited tone, "Mr. McBride, you can't go in there." Without offering any resistance or saying a word, I knelt down outside the stand on the ground and prayed to my Father, pled his promises, such as, "When the enemy comes in like a flood, I will rear up a standard against him. I am a present help in trouble. I will fight all your battles for you." Prayed for grace, victory, my enemies, etc. Rose perfectly calm. Meantime, my enemies cursed and swore some, but most of the time they were rather quiet. Mr. Hyatt, a slaveholder and merchant from Greensboro, said, "You can't preach here today. We have come to prevent you. We think you are doing harm, violating our laws, etc." "From what authority do you thus command and prevent me from preaching? Are you authorized by the civil authority to prevent me?" "No, sir." "Has God sent you, and does he enjoin it on you as a duty to stop me?" "I am unacquainted with him." "Well, acquaint now thyself with him, and be at peace, and he will give you a more honorable business than stopping men from preaching his gospel. The judgment day is coming on, and I summon you there to give an account of this day's conduct. And now, gentlemen, if I have violated the laws of North Carolina, by them I am willing to be judged, condemned, and punished, to go to the whipping post, pillory, or jail, or even to hug the stake. But, gentlemen, you are not generally a pack of ignoramuses. Your good sense teaches you the impropriety of your course. You know that you're doing wrong. You know that it is not right to trample all law, both human and divine, in the dust, out of professed love for it. You must see that your course will lead to perfect anarchy and confusion. The time may come when Jacob Hyatt may be in the minority, when his principles may be as unpopular as Jesse McBride's are now. What then? Why, if your course prevails, he must be lynched, whipped, stoned, tarred, and feathered, dragged from his own house, or his house burned over his head, and he perish in the ruins. The persons became food for the beasts they threw Daniel to. The same fire that was kindled for the Hebrew children consumed those who kindled it. Haman stretched the same rope he prepared for Mordecai. Yours is a dangerous course, and you must reap a retribution, either here or hereafter. We will sing a hymn, said I. "Oh, yes," said H., "you may sing." "The congregation will please assist me, as I am quite unwell," and I lined off the hymn. "Father, I stretch my hands to thee," and the riders and all helped to sing. All seemed in good humor, and I almost forgot their errand. When we closed, I said, "Let us pray." "God blanket, that's not singing," said one of the company, who stood back pretty well. While we invoked the divine blessing, I think many could say, "It is good for us to be here." Before I rose from my knees, after the friends rose, I delivered an exhortation of some 10 or 15 minutes, in which I urged the brethren to steadfastness, prayer, etc., some of the mob crying, "Lay hold of him, drag him out, stop him," etc. My voice being nearly drowned by the tumult, I left off. I was then called to have some conversation with H., who repeated some of the charges he preferred at first, said I was bringing on insurrection, causing disturbance, etc., wishing me to leave the state, said that he had some slaves, and he himself was the most of a slave of any of them, had harder times than they had, and he would like to be shut of them, and that he was my true friend. "As to your friendship, Mr. H., you have acted quite friendly, remarkably so, fully as much so as Judas when he kissed the Savior. As to your having to be so much of a slave, I am sorry for you. You ought to be freed. As to insurrection, I am decidedly opposed to it, having no sympathy with it whatever. As to raising disturbance and leaving the state, I left a little motherless daughter in Ohio over whom I wished to have an oversight and care. When I left, I only expected to remain in North Carolina 1 year, but the people dragged me up before this court under the charge of felony, put me in bonds, and kept me, and now would you have me leave my securities to suffer, have me lie and deceive the court? Oh, if you will leave, your bail will not have to suffer. That can, I think, be settled without much trouble, said Mr. H. They shall not have trouble on my account, said I. After talking with Mr. H. and one or two more on personal piety, etc., I went to the arbor, took my seat in the door of the stand for a minute, then rose, and after referring to a few texts of Scripture to show that all those who will live godly shall suffer persecution, I inquired, first, what is persecution? Secondly, noticed the fact shall suffer, gave a synoptical history of persecution by showing that Abel was the first martyr for the right, the Israelites' sufferings. The prophets were stoned, were sawn asunder, were tempted, were slain with the sword, had to wander in deserts, mountains, dens, and caves of the earth, were driven from their houses, given to ferocious beasts, lashed to the stake, and destroyed in different ways. Spoke of John the Baptist, showed how he was persecuted and what the charge. Christ was persecuted for doing what John was persecuted for not doing. Spoke of the sufferings of the apostles and their final death, of Luther and his coadjutors, of the Wesleys and early Methodists, of Fox and the early Quakers, of the early settlers in the colonies of the United States. Noticed why the righteous were persecuted, the advantages thereof to the righteous themselves, and how they should treat their persecutors, with kindness, etc. Spoke, I suppose, some half an hour, and dismissed. Towards the close, some of the rioters got quite angry and yelled, "Stop him! Pull him out! The righteous were never persecuted for damned abolitionism," etc. Some of them paid good attention to what I said, and thus we spent the time from 12 to 3 o'clock, and thus the meeting passed by. Brother dear, I am more and more confirmed in the righteousness of our cause. I would much rather die for good principles than to have applause and honor for propagating false theories and abominations. You perhaps would like to know how I feel. Happy most of the time, a religion that will not stand persecution will not take us to heaven. Blessed be God that I have not, thus far, been suffered to deny him. Sometimes I have thought that I was nearly home. I generally feel a calmness of soul, but sometimes my enjoyments are rapturous. I have had a great burden of prayer for the dear flock. Help me pray for them. Thank God I have not heard of one of them giving up or turning, and I believe some, if not most of them, would go to the stake rather than give back. I forgot to say I read a part of the 5th chapter of the Acts of Apostles to the rioters, commencing at the 17th verse. I told them if their institutions were of God, I could not harm them, and that if our cause was of God, they could not stop it, that they could kill me, but they could not kill the truth. Though I talked plainly, I talked and felt kindly to them. I have had to write in such haste, and being fatigued and unwell, my letter is disconnected. I meant to give you a copy of the letter of the mob. Here it is. Mr. McBride, we, the subscribers, very and most respectfully request that you not attempt to fulfill your appointment at this place. If you do, you will surely be interrupted. Signed by 32 persons. May 6th, 1851. Some were professors of religion, Presbyterians, Episcopal Methodists, and Methodist Protestants. One of the latter was an exhorter. I understand some of the crowd were Negro traders. Farewell, J. McBride. This ends Chapter 10, Part 2, Poor White Trash.
Part 4, Chapter 1, of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin, by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Nienaber. Chapter 1. The Influence of the American Church on Slavery, Part 1. There is no country in the world where the religious influence has a greater ascendancy than in America. There is no country where the clergy are more powerful. This is the more remarkable, because in America religion is entirely divorced from the state, and the clergy have none of those artificial means for supporting their influence which result from rank and wealth. Taken as a body of men, the American clergy are generally poor. The salaries given to them afford only a bare support, and yield them no means of acquiring property. Their style of living can be barely decent and respectable, and no more. The fact that, under these circumstances, the American clergy are probably the most powerful body of men in the country is of itself a strong presumptive argument in their favor. It certainly argues in them, as a class, both intellectual and moral superiority. It is a well-known fact that the influence of the clergy is looked upon by our statesmen as a most serious element in making up their political combinations, and that influence is so great that no statesman would ever undertake to carry a measure against which all the clergy of the country should unite. Such a degree of power, though it be only a power of opinion, argument, and example, is not without its dangers to the purity of any body of men. To be courted by political partisans is always a dangerous thing for the integrity and spirituality of men who profess to be governed by principles which are not of this world. The possession, too, of so great a power as we have described involves a most weighty responsibility, since, if the clergy do possess the power to rectify any great national immorality, the fact of its not being done seems in some sort to bring the sin of omission to their door. We have spoken thus far of the clergy alone, but in America, where the clergyman is, in most denominations, elected by the church and supported by its voluntary contributions, the influence of the church and that of the clergy are, to a very great extent, identical. The clergyman is the very ideal and expression of the church. They choose him and retain him because he expresses more perfectly than any other man they can obtain their ideas of truth and right. The clergyman is supported in all cases by his church, or else he cannot retain his position in it. The fact of his remaining there is generally proof of identity of opinion, since if he differed very materially from them, they have the power to withdraw from him and choose another. The influence of a clergyman thus retained by the free consent of the understanding and heart of his church is in some respects greater even than that of a papal priest. The priest can control only by a blind spiritual authority, to which, very often, the reason demurs, while it yields an outward assent. But the successful free minister takes captive the affections of the heart by his affections, overrules the reasoning powers by superior strength of reason, and thus, availing himself of affection, reason, conscience, and the entire man, possesses a power, from the very freedom of the organization, greater than can ever result from blind spiritual despotism. If a minister cannot succeed in doing this to some good extent in a church, he is called unsuccessful, and he who realizes this description most perfectly has the highest and most perfect kind of power, and expresses the idea of a successful American minister. In speaking, therefore, of this subject, we shall speak of the church and the clergy as identical, using the word church in the American sense of the word, for that class of men of all denominations who are organized in bodies distinct from nominal Christians as professing to be actually controlled by the precepts of Christ. What, then, is the influence of the church on this great question of slavery? Certain things are evident on the very face of the matter. 1. It has not put an end to it. 2. It has not prevented the increase of it. 3. It has not occasioned the repeal of the laws which forbid education to the slave. 4. It has not attempted to have laws passed forbidding the separation of families and legalizing the marriage of slaves. 5. It has not stopped the internal slave trade. 6. It has not prevented the extension of this system, with all its wrongs, over new territories. With regard to these assertions, it is presumed there can be no difference of opinion. What, then, have they done? In reply to this, it can be stated, 1. That almost every one of the leading denominations have, at some time in their collective capacity, expressed a decided disapprobation of the system, and recommended that something should be done with a view to its abolition. 2. One denomination of Christians has pursued such a course as entirely, and in fact, to free every one of its members from any participation in slaveholding. We refer to the Quakers. The course by which this result has been effected will be shown by a pamphlet, soon to be issued by the poet H.G. Whittier, one of their own body. 3. Individual members in all denominations, animated by the spirit of Christianity, have in various ways entered their protest against it. It will be well now to consider more definitely and minutely the sentiments which some leading ecclesiastical bodies in the Church have expressed on this subject. It is fair that the writer should state the sources from which the quotations are drawn. Those relating to the action of Southern judicatories are principally from a pamphlet compiled by the Honorable James G. Birney, and entitled, quote, "The Church, the Bulwark of Slavery," end quote. The writer addressed a letter to Mr. Birney, in which she inquired the sources from which he compiled. His reply was, in substance, as follows: that the pamphlet was compiled from original documents, or files of newspapers, which had recorded these transactions at the time of their occurrence. It was compiled and published in England in 1842, with a view of leading the people there to understand the position of the American Church and clergy. Mr. Birney says that although the statements have long been before the world, he has never known one of them to be disputed; that, knowing the extraordinary nature of the sentiments, he took the utmost pains to authenticate them. We will first present those of the Southern States. 1. The Presbyterian Church, Harmony Presbytery of South Carolina. Whereas sundry persons in Scotland and England, and others in the north, east, and west of our country, have denounced slavery as obnoxious to the laws of God, some of whom have presented before the General Assembly of our Church and the Congress of the nation memorials and petitions with the avowed object of bringing into disgrace slaveholders and abolishing the relation of master and slave, and whereas from the said proceedings, and the statements, reasonings, and circumstances connected therewith, it is most manifest that those persons, quote, know not what they say, nor whereof they affirm, end quote, and with this ignorance discover a spirit of self-righteousness and exclusive sanctity, etc. Therefore, 1. Resolved, that as the kingdom of our Lord is not of this world, his Church, as such, has no right to abolish, alter, or affect any institution or ordinance of men, political or civil, etc. 2. Resolved, that slavery has existed from the days of those good old slaveholders and patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who are now in the kingdom of heaven, to the time when the Apostle Paul sent a runaway home to his master Philemon, and wrote a Christian and fraternal letter to this slaveholder, which we find still stands in the canon of the Scriptures, and that slavery has existed ever since the days of the Apostle, and does now exist. 3. Resolved, that as the relative duties of master and slave are taught in the Scriptures in the same manner as those of parent and child, and husband and wife, the existence of slavery itself is not opposed to the will of God, and whosoever has a conscience too tender to recognize this relation as lawful is, quote, righteous over much, end quote, is, quote, wise above what is written, end quote, and has submitted his neck to the yoke of men, sacrificed his Christian liberty of conscience, and leaves the infallible word of God for the fancies and doctrines of men. The Charleston Union Presbytery. It is a principle which meets the views of this body that slavery, as it exists among us, is a political institution, with which ecclesiastical judicatories have not the smallest right to interfere, and in relation to which any such interference, especially at the present momentous crisis, would be morally wrong, and fraught with the most dangerous and pernicious consequences. The sentiments which we maintain, in common with Christians at the South of every denomination, are sentiments which so fully approve themselves to our consciences, are so identified with our solemn convictions of duty, that we should maintain them under any circumstances. Resolved, that in the opinion of this presbytery, the holding of slaves, so far from being a sin in the sight of God, is nowhere condemned in his holy word, that it is in accordance with the example or consistent with the precepts of patriarchs, apostles, and prophets, and that it is compatible with the most fraternal regard to the best good of those servants whom God may have committed to our charge. The New School Presbyterian Church in Petersburg, Virginia, November 16, 1838, passed the following. Whereas the General Assembly did, in the year 1818, pass a law which contains provisions for slaves irreconcilable with our civil institutions, and solemnly declaring slavery to be sin against God, a law at once offensive and insulting to the whole Southern community. 1. Resolved, that as slaveholders we cannot consent longer to remain in connection with any church where there exists a statute conferring the right upon slaves to arraign their masters before the judicatory of the church, and that, too, for the act of selling them without their consent first had been obtained. 2. Resolved, that as the great head of the church has recognized the relation of master and slave, we conscientiously believe that slavery is not a sin against God, as declared by the General Assembly. This sufficiently indicates the opinion of the Southern Presbyterian Church. The next extracts will refer to the opinions of Baptist churches. In 1835, the Charleston Baptist Association addressed a memorial to the legislature of South Carolina, which contains the following. The undersigned would further represent that the said association does not consider that the Holy Scriptures have made the fact of slavery a question of morals at all. The divine author of our holy religion, in particular, found slavery a part of the existing institutions of society, with which, if not sinful, it was not his design to intermeddle, but to leave them entirely to the control of men. Adopting this, therefore, as one of the allowed arrangements of society, he made it the province of his religion only to prescribe the reciprocal duties of the relation. The question, it is believed, is purely one of political economy. It amounts, in effect, to this: whether the operatives of a country shall be bought and sold, and themselves become property, as in this state, or whether they shall be hirelings, and their labor only become property, as in some other states. In other words, whether an employer may buy the whole time of laborers at once, of those who have a right to dispose of it, with a permanent relation of protection and care over them, or whether he shall be restricted to buy it in certain portions only, subject to their control, and with no such permanent relation of care and protection. The right of masters to dispose of the time of their slaves has been distinctly recognized by the Creator of all things, who is surely at liberty to vest the right of property over any object in whomsoever he pleases. That the lawful possessor should retain this right at will is no more against the laws of society and good morals than that he should retain the personal endowments with which his Creator has blessed him, or the money and lands inherited from his ancestors or acquired by his industry. And neither society nor individuals have any more authority to demand a relinquishment without an equivalent in the one case than in the other. As it is a question purely of political economy, and one which in this country is reserved to the cognizance of the state governments severally, it is further believed that the state of South Carolina alone has the right to regulate the existence and condition of slavery within her territorial limits, and we should resist to the utmost every invasion of this right, come from what quarter and under what pretense it may. The Methodist Church is, in some respects, peculiarly situated upon this subject, because its Constitution and Book of Discipline contain the most vehement denunciations against slavery of which language is capable, and the most stringent requisitions that all members shall be disciplined for the holding of slaves, and these denunciations and requisitions have been reaffirmed by its General Conference. It seemed to be necessary, therefore, for the Southern Conference to take some notice of this fact, which they did, with great coolness and distinctness as follows. The Georgia Annual Conference. Resolved unanimously that whereas there is a clause in the discipline of our Church which states that we are as much as ever convinced of the great evil of slavery, and whereas the said clause has been perverted by some, and used in such a manner as to produce the impression that the Methodist Episcopal Church believed slavery to be a moral evil, therefore resolved that it is the sense of the Georgia Annual Conference that slavery, as it exists in the United States, is not a moral evil. Resolved that we view slavery as a civil and domestic institution, and one with which, as ministers of Christ, we have nothing to do, further than to ameliorate the condition of the slave by endeavoring to impart to him and his master the benign influence of the religion of Christ, and aiding both on their way to heaven. On motion, it was resolved unanimously that the Georgia Annual Conference regard with feelings of profound respect and approbation the dignified course pursued by our several superintendents or bishops in suppressing the attempts that have been made by various individuals to get up and protract an excitement in the churches and country on the subject of abolitionism. Resolved, further, that they shall have our cordial and zealous support in sustaining them in the ground they have taken. South Carolina Conference. The Reverend W. Martin introduced resolutions similar to those of the Georgia Conference. The Reverend W. Capers, D.D., after expressing his conviction that the sentiment of the resolutions was universally held not only by the ministers of that conference but of the whole South, and after stating that the only true doctrine was, "It belongs to Caesar and not to the Church," offered the following as a substitute. Whereas we hold that the subject of slavery in these United States is not one proper for the action of the Church, but is exclusively appropriate to the civil authorities, therefore resolved that this conference will not intermeddle with it, further than to express our regret that it has ever been introduced, in any form, into any one of the judicatories of the Church. Brother Martin accepted the substitute. Brother Betts asked whether the substitute was intended as implying that slavery as it exists among us was not a moral evil. He understood it as equivalent to such a declaration. Brother Capers explained that his intention was to convey that sentiment fully and unequivocally, and that he had chosen the form of the substitute for the purpose not only of reproving some wrong-doings at the North, but with reference also to the General Conference. If slavery were a moral evil, that is, sinful, the Church would be bound to take cognizance of it, but our affirmation is that it is not a matter for her jurisdiction, but is exclusively appropriate to the civil government, and of course not sinful. The substitute was then unanimously adopted. In 1836, an Episcopal clergyman in North Carolina, of the name of Freeman, preached in the presence of his bishop, Reverend Levi S. Ives, D.D., and native of a free state, 2 sermons on the rights and duties of slaveholders. In these he essayed to justify from the Bible the slavery of both white men and Negroes, and insisted that, without a new revelation from heaven, no man was authorized to pronounce slavery wrong. The sermons were printed in a pamphlet, prefaced with a letter to Mr. Freeman from the Bishop of North Carolina, declaring that he had listened with most unfeigned pleasure to his discourses, and advised their publication as being urgently called for at the present time. The Protestant Episcopal Society for the Advancement of Christianity in South Carolina thought it expedient to republish Mr. Freeman's pamphlet as a religious tract. Afterwards, when the addition of the new state of Texas made it important to organize the Episcopal Church there, this Mr. Freeman was made Bishop of Texas. The question may now arise, it must arise to every intelligent thinker in Christendom, can it be possible that American slavery as defined by its laws and the decisions of its courts, including all the horrible abuses that the laws recognize and sanction, is considered to be a right and proper institution? Do these Christians merely recognize the relation of slavery in the abstract as one that, under proper legislation, might be made a good one, or do they justify it as it actually exists in America. It is a fact that there is a large party at the South who justify not only slavery in the abstract, but slavery just as it exists in America, in whole and in part, in even its worst abuses. There are 4 legalized parts or results of the system, which are of especial atrocity. They are: 1. The prohibition of the testimony of colored people in cases of trial. 2. The forbidding of education. 3. The internal slave trade. 4. The consequent separation of families. We shall bring evidence to show that every one of these practices has been either defended on principle or recognized without condemnation by decisions of judicatories of churches or by writings of influential clergymen, without any expression of dissent being made to their opinions by the bodies to which they belong. In the first place, the exclusion of colored testimony in the church. In 1840, the General Conference of the Methodist Episcopal Church passed the following resolution: that it is inexpedient and unjustifiable for any preacher to permit colored persons to give testimony against white persons in any state where they are denied that privilege by law. This was before the Methodist Church had separated on the question of slavery, and they subsequently did into Northern and Southern conferences. Both Northern and Southern members voted for this resolution. After this was passed, the conscience of many Northern ministers was aroused, and they called for a reconsideration. The Southern members imperiously demanded that it should remain as a compromise and test of union. The spirit of the discussion may be inferred from one extract. Mr. Peck, of New York, who moved the reconsideration of the resolution, thus expressed himself: that the resolution, said he, was introduced under peculiar circumstances, during considerable excitement, and he went for it as a peace offering to the South, without sufficiently reflecting upon the precise import of its phraseology. But, after a little deliberation, he was sorry, and he had been sorry but once, and that was all the time he was convinced that, if that resolution remained upon the journal, it would be disastrous to the whole Northern Church. Rev. Dr. A.J. Few of Georgia, the mover of the original resolution, then rose. The following extracts are from his speech: "Look at it. What do you declare to us in taking this course? Why, simply as much as to say, quote, 'We cannot sustain you in the condition which you cannot avoid.' End quote. We cannot sustain you in the necessary conditions of slaveholding, one of its necessary conditions being the rejection of Negro testimony. If it is not sinful to hold slaves under all circumstances, it is not sinful to hold them in the only condition, and under the only circumstances which they can be held. The rejection of Negro testimony is one of the necessary circumstances under which slaveholding can exist. Indeed, it is utterly impossible for it to exist without it. Therefore, it is not sinful to hold slaves in the condition and under the circumstances which they are held at the South, inasmuch as they can be held under no other circumstances. If you believe that slaveholding is necessarily sinful, come out with the abolitionists and honestly say so. If you believe that slaveholding is necessarily sinful, you believe we are necessarily sinners. And if so, come out and honestly declare it, and let us leave you. We want to know distinctly, precisely, and honestly the position which you take. We cannot be tampered with by you any longer. We have had enough of it. We are tired of your sickly sympathies. If you are not opposed to the principles which it involves, unite with us, like honest men, and go home and boldly meet the consequences. We say again, you are responsible for this state of things, for it is you who have driven us to the alarming point where we find ourselves. You have made that resolution absolutely necessary to the quiet of the South, but you now revoke that resolution, and you pass the Rubicon. Let me not be misunderstood. I say you pass the Rubicon. If you revoke the principle which that resolution involves, and you array the whole South against you, and we must separate. If you accord to the principles which it involves, arising from the necessity of the case, Stick by it, though the heavens perish. But if you persist on reconsideration, I ask in what light will your course be regarded in the South? What will be the conclusion there in reference to it? Why, that you cannot sustain us as long as we hold slaves. It will declare in the face of the sun, "We cannot sustain you, gentlemen, while you retain your slaves." Your opposition to the resolution is based on your opposition to slavery. You cannot, therefore, maintain your consistency unless you come out with the abolitionists and condemn us at once and forever, or else refuse to reconsider. The resolution was therefore left in force, with another resolution appended to it, expressing the undiminished regard of the General Conference for the colored population. It is quite evident that it was undiminished for the best of reasons. That the colored population were not properly impressed with this last act of condescension appears from the fact that, "the official members of the Sharp Street and Asbury Colored Methodist Church in Baltimore," protested and petitioned against the motion. The following is a passage from their address. The adoption of such a resolution by our highest ecclesiastical judicatory, a judicatory composed of the most experienced and wisest brethren in the Church, the choice selection of 28 annual conferences, has inflicted, we fear, an irreparable injury upon 80,000 souls for whom Christ died. Souls who, by this act of your body, have been stripped of the dignity of Christians, degraded in the scale of humanity, and treated as criminals for no other reason than the color of their skin. Your resolution has, in our humble opinion, virtually declared that a mere physical peculiarity, the handiwork of our all-wise and benevolent Creator, is prima facie evidence of incompetency to tell the truth, or is an unerring indication of unworthiness to bear testimony against a fellow being whose skin is denominated white. Brethren, out of the abundance of the heart we have spoken. Our grievance is before you. If you have any regard for the salvation of the 80,000 immortal souls committed to your care, if you would not thrust beyond the pale of the Church 2,500 souls in this city who have felt determined never to leave the Church that has nourished and brought them up, if you regard us as children of one common Father, and can, upon reflection, sympathize with us as members of the body of Christ, if you would not incur the fearful, the tremendous responsibility of offending not only one, but many thousands of his, "little ones," we conjure you to wipe from your journal the odious resolution which is ruining our people. A colored Baltimorean, writing to the editor of Zion's Watchman, says, "The address was presented to one of the secretaries, a delegate of the Baltimore Conference, and subsequently given by him to the bishops. How many of the members of the conference saw it, I know not. One thing is certain, it was not read to the conference." With regard to the second head, of defending the laws which prevent the slave from being taught to read and write, we have the following instance. In the year 1835, the Chillicothe Presbytery, Ohio, addressed a Christian remonstrance to the Presbytery of Mississippi on the subject of slavery, in which they specifically enumerated the respects in which they considered it to be unchristian. The 8th resolution was as follows: "That any member of our Church, who shall advocate or speak in favor of such laws as have been or may yet be enacted, for the purpose of keeping the slaves in ignorance, and preventing them from learning to read the Word of God, is guilty of a great sin, and ought to be dealt with as for other scandalous crimes." This remonstrance was answered by Rev. James Smiley, stated clerk of the Mississippi Presbytery, and afterwards of the Amity Presbytery of Louisiana, in a pamphlet of 87 pages, in which he defended slavery generally and particularly, in the same manner in which all other abuses have always been defended, by the Word of God. The 10th section of this pamphlet is devoted to the defense of this law. He devotes 7 pages of fine print to this subject. He says, page 63, "There are laws existing in both states, Mississippi and Louisiana, accompanied with heavy penal sanctions, prohibiting the teaching of the slaves to read, and meeting the approbation of the religious part of the reflecting community. He adds, still further, the laws preventing the slaves from learning to read are a fruitful source of much ignorance and immorality among the slaves. The printing, publishing, and circulating of abolition and emancipatory principles in those states was the cause of the passage of those laws. He then goes on to say that the ignorance and vice which are the consequence of those laws do not properly belong to those who made the laws, but to those whose emancipating doctrines rendered them necessary. Speaking of these consequences of ignorance and vice, he says, "Upon whom must they be saddled? If you will allow me to answer the question, I will answer by saying, upon such great and good men as John Wesley, Jonathan Edwards, Bishop Porteous, Paley, Horsley, Scott, Clark, Wilberforce, Sharp, Clarkson, Fox, Johnson, Burke, and other great and good men, who, without examining the Word of God, have concluded that it is a true maxim that slavery is in itself sinful." He then illustrates the necessity of these laws by the following simile. He supposes that the doctrine had been promulgated that the authority of parents was an unjust usurpation, and that it was getting a general hold of society, that societies were being formed for the emancipation of children from the control of their parents, that all books were beginning to be pervaded by this sentiment, and that under all these influences children were becoming restless and fractious. He supposes that, under these circumstances, parents meet and refer the subject to legislators. He thus describes the dilemma of the legislators. These meet, and they take the subject seriously and solemnly into consideration. On the one hand, they perceive that, if their children had access to these doctrines, they were ruined forever. To let them have access to them was unavoidable, if they taught them to read. To prevent their being taught to read was cruel, and would prevent them from obtaining as much knowledge of the laws of heaven as otherwise they might enjoy. In this sad dilemma, sitting and consulting in a legislative capacity, they must, of two evils, choose the least. With indignant feelings toward those who, under the influence of, quote, seducing spirits, end quote, had sent and were sending among them, quote, doctrines of devils, end quote, but with aching hearts toward their children, they resolved that their children should not be taught to read, until the storm should be overblown, hoping that Satan's being let loose will be but for a little season. And during this season they will have to teach them orally, and thereby guard against their being contaminated by these wicked doctrines. So much for that law. End of Part 4, Chapter 1. Part 4, Chapter 1 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Jim Nienaber. Chapter 1. Influence of the American Church on Slavery, Part 2. Now as for the internal slave trade, the very essence of that trade is the buying and selling of human beings for the mere purposes of gain. A master who has slaves transmitted to him, or a master who buys slaves with the purpose of retaining them on his plantation or in his family, can be supposed to have some object in it besides the mere purpose of gain. He may be supposed, in certain cases, to have some regard to the happiness or well-being of the slave. The trader buys and sells for the mere purpose of gain. Concerning this abuse, the Chillicothe Presbytery, in the document to which we have alluded, passed the following resolution. Resolved, that the buying, selling, or holding of a slave for the sake of gain is a heinous sin and scandal, requiring the cognizance of the judicatories of the Church. In the reply from which we have already quoted, Mr. Smiley says, page 13, "If the buying, selling, and holding of a slave for the sake of gain is, as you say, a heinous sin and scandal, then verily 3/4 of all Episcopalians, Methodists, Baptists, and Presbyterians in the 11 states of the Union are of the devil." Again, to question whether slaveholders or slave buyers are of the devil seems to me like calling in question whether God is or is not a true witness, that is, provided it is God's testimony, and not merely the testimony of the Chillicothe Presbytery, that it is a heinous sin and scandal to buy, sell, and hold slaves. Again, page 21. If language can convey a clear and definite meaning at all, I know not how it can more plainly or unequivocally present to the mind any thought or idea than the 25th chapter of Leviticus clearly and unequivocally establishes the fact that slavery was sanctioned by God himself, and that buying, selling, holding, and bequeathing slaves as property are regulations which are established by himself. What language can more explicitly show, not that God winked at slavery merely, but that, to say the least, he gave a written permit to the Hebrews, then the best people in the world, to buy, hold, and bequeath men and women to perpetual servitude? What now becomes of the position of the Chillicothe Presbytery? Is it indeed a fact that God once gave a written permission to his own dear people, "Ye shall buy," to do that which is in itself sinful? Nay, to do that which the Chillicothe Presbytery says is a heinous sin and scandal? God resolves that his own children may, or rather shall, buy, possess, and hold bondmen and bondwomen in bondage forever. But the Chillicothe Presbytery resolves that buying, selling, or holding slaves for the sake of gain is a heinous sin and scandal. We do not mean to say that Mr. Smiley had the internal slave trade directly in his mind in writing these sentences, but we do say that no slave trader would ask for a more explicit justification of his trade than this. Lastly, in regard to that dissolution of the marriage relation, which is the necessary consequence of this kind of trade, the following decisions have been made by judicatories of the Church. The Savannah River Baptist Association, in 1835, in reply to the question, whether, in a case of involuntary separation of such a character as to preclude all prospect of future intercourse, the parties ought to be allowed to marry again, answered, that such a separation, among persons situated as our slaves are, is civilly a separation by death, and they believe that, in the sight of God, it would be so viewed. To forbid second marriages in such cases would be to expose the parties not only to stronger hardships and strong temptation, but to church censure for acting in obedience to their masters, who cannot be expected to acquiesce in a regulation at variance with justice to the slaves, and to the spirit of that command which regulates marriage among Christians. The slaves are not free agents, and a dissolution by death is not more entirely without their consent and beyond their control than by such separation. At the Shiloh Baptist Association, which met at Gordvine a few years since, the following query, says the Religious Herald, was presented from Hedgeman Church, viz., is a servant whose husband or wife has been sold by his or her master into a distant country to be permitted to marry again? The query was referred to a committee, who made the following report, which, after discussion, was adopted: that in view of the circumstances in which servants in this country are placed, the committee are unanimous in the opinion that it is better to permit servants thus circumstanced to take another husband or wife. The Reverend Charles C. Jones, who was an earnest and indefatigable laborer for the good of the slave, and one who, it would be supposed, would be likely to feel strongly on this subject, if anyone would, simply remarks, in estimating the moral condition of the negroes, that, as husband and wife are subject to all the vicissitudes of property, and may be separated by division of estate, debts, sales or removals, etc., etc., the marriage relation naturally loses much of its sacredness, and says, it is a contract of convenience, profit, or pleasure, that may be entered into and dissolved at the will of the parties, and that without heinous sin or injury to the property interests of any one. In this sentence he is expressing, as we suppose, the common idea of slaves and masters of the nature of this institution, and not his own. We infer this from the fact that he endeavors in his catechism to impress on the slave the sacredness and perpetuity of the relation. But when the most pious and devoted men that the South has, and those professing to spend their lives for the service of the slave, thus calmly and without any reprobation, contemplate this state of things as a state with which Christianity does not call on them to interfere, what can be expected of the world in general? It is to be remarked, with regard to the sentiments of Mr. Smiley's pamphlet, that they are endorsed in the appendix by a document in the name of 2 presbyteries, which document, though with less minuteness of investigation, takes the same ground with Mr. Smiley. This Reverend James Smiley was one who, in company with the Reverend John L. Montgomery, was appointed by the Synod of Mississippi in 1839 to write or compile a catechism for the instruction of the Negroes. Mr. Jones says in his History of the Religious Instruction of the Negroes, page 83, "The Reverend James Smiley and the Reverend C. Blair are engaged in this good work of enlightening the Negroes systematically and constantly in Mississippi. The former clergyman is characterized as an aged and indefatigable father. His success in enlightening the Negroes has been very great. A large proportion of the Negroes in his old church can recite both Williston's and the Westminster Catechism very accurately." The writer really wishes that it were in her power to make copious extracts from Mr. Smiley's pamphlet. A great deal could be learned from it as to what style of mind and habits of thought and modes of viewing religious subjects are likely to grow up under such an institution. The man is undoubtedly and heartily sincere in his opinions, and appears to maintain them with the most abounding and triumphant joyfulness, as the very latest improvement in theological knowledge. We are tempted to present a part of his introduction, simply for the light it gives us on the style of thinking, which is to be found on our southwestern waters. In presenting the following review to the public, the author was not entirely or mainly influenced by a desire or hope to correct the views of the Chillicothe Presbytery. He had hoped the publication would be of essential service to others, as well as to the Presbytery. From his intercourse with religious societies of all denominations, in Mississippi and Louisiana, he was aware that the abolition maxim, namely, that slavery is in itself sinful, had gained on and entwined itself among the religious and conscientious scruples of many in the community, so far as not only to render them unhappy, but to draw off the attention from the great and important duty of a householder to his household. The eye of the mind, resting on slavery itself as a corrupt fountain from which, of necessity, nothing but corrupt streams could flow, was incessantly employed in search of some plan, by which, with safety, the fountain could, in some future time, be entirely dried up, never reflecting or dreaming that slavery, in itself considered, was an innoxious relation, and that the whole error rested in the neglect of the relative duties of the relation. If there be a consciousness of guilt resting on the mind, it is all the same as to the effect, whether the conscience is or is not right. Although the Word of God alone ought to be the guide of conscience, yet it is not always the case. Hence conscientious scruples sometimes exist for neglecting to do that which the Word of God condemns. The Bornean, who neglects to kill his father and to eat him with his dates when he has become old, is sorely tortured by the wringings of a guilty conscience, when his filial tenderness and sympathy have gained the ascendancy over his apprehended duty of killing his parent. In like manner, many a slaveholder whose conscience is guided not by the Word of God, but by the doctrines of men, is often suffering the lashes of a guilty conscience, even when he renders to his slave that which is just and equal according to the Scriptures, simply because he does not emancipate his slave, irrespective of the benefit or injury done by such an act. How beautiful upon the mountains, in the apprehension of the reviewer, would be the feet of him that would bring to the Bornean the glad tidings that his conduct in sparing the life of his tender and affectionate parent was no sin. Equally beautiful and delightful, does the reviewer trust, will it be to an honest, scrupulous, and conscientious slaveholder to learn from the Word of God the glad tidings that slavery itself is not sinful. Released now from an incubus that paralyzed his energies in discharge of duty toward his slaves, he goes forth cheerfully to energetic action. It is not now as formerly, when he viewed slavery as in itself sinful. He can now pray with the hope of being heard, that God will bless his exertions to train up his slaves in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, whereas before he was retarded by this consideration. If I regard iniquity in my heart, the Lord will not hear me. Instead of hanging down his head, moping and brooding over his condition as formerly, without action, he raises his head and moves on cheerfully in the plain path of duty. He is no more tempted to look askance at the word of God, and saying, Hast thou found me, O mine enemy? Come to filch from me my slaves, which, while not enriching them, leaves me poor indeed. Instead of viewing the word of God as formerly, come with whips and scorpions to chastise him into paradise, he feels that its ways are ways of pleasantness, and its paths peace. Distinguishing now between the real word of God and what are only the doctrines and commandments of men, the mystery is solved, which was before insolvable, namely, the statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. If you should undertake to answer such a man by saying that his argument proves too much, that neither Christ nor his apostles bore any explicit testimony against the gladiatorial shows and the sports of the arena, and therefore it would be right to get them up in America, the probability seems to be that he would heartily assent to it, and think, on the whole, that it might be a good speculation. As a further specimen of the free and easy facetiousness which seems to be a trait in this production, see, on page 58, where the Latin motto Facilis descensus Averne sed revocare, etc., receives the following quite free and truly Western translation, which he good-naturedly says is given for the benefit of those who do not understand Latin: It is easy to go to the devil, but the devil to get back. Some uncharitable people might, perhaps, say that the preachers of such doctrines are as likely as anybody to have an experimental knowledge on this point. The idea of this jovial old father instructing a class of black Sams or young Topsies in the mysteries of the Assembly's catechism is truly picturesque. That Mr. Smiley's opinions on the subject of slavery have been amply supported and carried out by leading clergymen in every denomination, we might give volumes of quotations to show. A second head, however, is yet to be considered, with regard to the influence of the Southern Church and clergy. It is well known that the Southern political community have taken their stand upon the position that the institution of slavery shall not be open to discussion. In many of the slave states, stringent laws exist subjecting fine and imprisonment, and even death, any who speak or publish anything on the subject, except in its favor. They have not only done this with regard to citizens of slave states, but they have shown the strongest disposition to do it with regard to citizens of free states, and when these discussions could not be repelled by regular law, they have encouraged the use of illegal measures. In the published letters and speeches of Horace Mann, the following examples are given, page 467. In 1831, the legislature of Georgia offered $5,000 to anyone who would arrest and bring to trial and conviction in Georgia a citizen of Massachusetts named William Lloyd Garrison. This law was approved by W. Lumpkin, governor, December 26, 1831. At a meeting of slaveholders held at Sterling in the same state, September 4, 1835, it was formally recommended to the governor to offer by proclamation $5,000 reward for the apprehension of any one of 10 persons, citizens, with one exception, of New York and Massachusetts, whose names were given. The Milledgeville, Georgia, Federal Union of February 1, 1836, contained an offer of $10,000 for the arrest and kidnapping of the Reverend A. A. Phelps of New York. The Committee of Vigilance of the parish of East Feliciana offered, in the Louisville Journal of October 15, 1835, $50,000 to any person who would deliver into their hands Arthur Tappan of New York. At a public meeting at Mount Meigs, Alabama, August 13, 1836, the Honorable Bedford Ginnis in the chair, a reward of $50,000 was offered for the apprehension of the same Arthur Tappan, or of Leroy Sunderland, a Methodist clergyman of New York. Of course, as none of these persons could be seized except in violation of the laws of the state where they were citizens, this was offering a public reward for an act of felony. Throughout all Southern states, associations were formed called Committees of Vigilance for the taking of measures for suppressing abolition opinions, and for the punishment by lynch law of suspected persons. At Charleston, South Carolina, a mob of this description forced open the post office and made a general inspection, at their pleasure, of its contents, and whatever publication they found there which they considered to be of a dangerous and anti-slavery tendency, they made a public bonfire of in the street. A large public meeting was held a few days afterwards to complete the preparation for excluding anti-slavery principles from publication, and for ferreting out persons suspected of abolitionism, that they might be subjected to lynch law. Similar popular meetings were held through the Southern and Western states. At one of these, held in Clinton, Mississippi, in the year 1835, the following resolutions were passed. Resolved, that slavery through the South and West is not felt as an evil, moral or political, but it is recognized in reference to the actual, and not to any utopian condition of our slaves, as a blessing both to master and slave. Resolved, that it is our decided opinion that any individual who dares to circulate, with a view to effectuate the designs of the abolitionists, any of the incendiary tracts or newspapers now in a course of transmission to this country, is justly worthy in the sight of God and man of immediate death, and we doubt not that such would be the punishment of any such offender in any part of the state of Mississippi where he may be found. Resolved, that the clergy of the state of Mississippi be hereby recommended at once to take a stand upon this subject, and that their further silence in relation thereto at this crisis will, in our opinion, be subject to serious censure. The treatment to which persons were exposed, when taken up by any of these vigilance committees, as suspected of anti-slavery sentiments, may be gathered from the following account. The writer has a distinct recollection of the circumstances at the present time, as the victim of this injustice was a member of the seminary then under the care of her father. Amos Dresser, now a missionary in Jamaica, was a theological student at Lane Seminary near Cincinnati. In the vacation, August 1835, he undertook to sell Bibles in the state of Tennessee, with a view to raise means further to continue his studios. Whilst there, he fell under suspicion of being an abolitionist, was arrested by the Vigilance Committee whilst attending a religious meeting in the neighborhood of Nashville, the capital of the state, and, after an afternoon and evening's inquisition, condemned to receive 20 lashes on his naked body. The sentence was executed on him between 11 and 12 o'clock on Saturday night, in the presence of most of the committee, and of an infuriated and blaspheming mob. The Vigilance Committee, an unlawful association, consisted of 60 persons. Of these, 27 were members of churches, one a religious teacher, another the elder who but a few days before, in the Presbyterian Church, handed Mr. Dresser the bread and wine at the communion of the Lord's Supper. It will readily be seen that the principle involved in such proceedings as these involves more than the question of slavery. The question was, in fact, this: whether it is so important to hold African slaves that it is proper to deprive free Americans of the liberty of conscience and liberty of speech and liberty of the press in order to do it. It is easy to see that very serious changes would be made in the government of a country by the admission of this principle, because it is quite plain that, if all these principles of our free government may be given up for one thing, they may for another, and that its ultimate tendency is to destroy entirely that freedom of opinion and thought which is considered to be the distinguishing excellence of American institutions. The question now is, did the Church join with the world in thinking the institution of slavery so important and desirable as to lead them to look with approbation upon lynch law and the sacrifice of the rights of free inquiry? We answer the reader by submitting the following facts and quotations. At the large meeting which we have described above in Charleston, South Carolina, the Charleston Courier informs us that the clergy of all denominations attended in a body, lending their sanction to the proceedings, and adding by their presence to the impressive character of the scene. There can be no doubt that the presence of the clergy of all denominations in a body at a meeting held for such a purpose was an impressive scene, truly. At this meeting it was resolved that the thanks of this meeting are due to the reverend gentlemen of the clergy in this city, who have so promptly and so effectually responded to public sentiment by suspending their schools in which the free colored population were taught, and that this meeting deem it a patriotic action, worthy of all praise and proper to be imitated by other teachers of similar schools throughout the state. The question here arises whether their Lord at the day of judgment will comment on their actions in a similar strain. The alarm of the Virginia slaveholders was not less, nor were the clergy in the city of Richmond, the capital, less prompt than the clergy in Charleston to respond to public sentiment. Accordingly, on the 29th of July, they assembled together and resolved unanimously that we earnestly deprecate the unwarrantable and highly improper interference of the people of any other state with the domestic relations of master and slave, that the example of our Lord Jesus Christ and his apostles in not interfering with the question of slavery, but uniformly recognizing the relations of master and servant, and giving full and affectionate instruction to both, is worthy of the imitation of all ministers of the gospel, that we will not patronize nor receive any pamphlet or newspaper of the anti-slavery societies, and that we will discountenance the circulation of all such papers in the community. The Reverend J.C. Postel, a Methodist minister of South Carolina, concludes a very violent letter to the editor of Zion's Watchman, a Methodist anti-slavery paper published in New York, in the following manner. The reader will see that this taunt is an allusion to the offer of $50,000 for his body at the South, which we have given before. But if you desire to educate the slaves, I will tell you how to raise the money without editing Zion's Watchman. You and old Arthur Tappan come out to the South this winter, and they will raise $100,000 for you. New Orleans itself will be pledged for it. Desiring no further acquaintance with you, and never expecting to see you but once in time or eternity, that is at the judgment, I subscribe myself the friend of the Bible and the opposer of abolitionists. J.C. Postel, Orangeburg, July 21, 1836. The Reverend Thomas S. Witherspoon, a member of the Presbyterian Church, writing to the editor of the Emancipator, says, I draw my warrant from the Scriptures of the Old and New Testament to hold the slave in bondage. The principle of holding the heathen in bondage is recognized by God. When the tardy process of the law is too long in redressing our grievances, we of the South have adopted the summary remedy of Judge Lynch, and really I think it one of the most wholesome and salutary remedies for the malady of Northern fanaticism that can be applied, and no doubt my worthy friend, the editor of the Emancipator and Human Rights, would feel the better of its enforcement, provided he had a Southern administrator. I go to the Bible for my warrant in all moral matters. Let your emissaries dare venture to cross the Potomac, and I cannot promise you that their fate will be less than Haman's. Then beware how you goad an insulted but magnanimous people to deeds of desperation. The Reverend Robert N. Anderson, also a member of the Presbyterian Church, says in a letter to the sessions of the Presbyterian congregations within the bounds of the West Hanover Presbytery, At the approaching stated meeting of our presbytery, I design to offer a preamble and string of resolutions on the subject of the use of wine in the Lord's Supper, and also a preamble and string of resolutions on the subject of the treasonable and abominably wicked interference of the Northern and Eastern fanatics with our political and civil rights, our property, and our domestic concerns. You are aware that our clergy, whether with or without reason, are more suspected by the public than the clergy of other denominations. Now, dear Christian brethren, I humbly express it as my earnest wish that you quit yourselves like men. If there be any stray goat of a minister among you, tainted with the bloodhound principles of abolitionism, let him be ferreted out, silenced, excommunicated, and left to the public to dispose of him in other respects. Your affectionate brother in the Lord, Robert N. Anderson. The Reverend William S. Plummer, D.D. of Richmond, a member of the Old School Presbyterian Church, is another instance of the same sort. He was absent from Richmond at the time the clergy in that city purged themselves in a body from the charge of being favorably disposed to abolition. On his return he lost no time in communicating to the chairman of the Committee of Correspondence his agreement with his clerical brethren. The passages quoted occur in his letter to the chairman. "I have carefully watched this matter from its earliest existence, and everything I have seen or heard of its character, both from its patrons and its enemies, has confirmed me beyond repentance in the belief that, let the character of abolitionists be what it may in the sight of the Judge of all the earth, this is the most meddlesome, impudent, reckless, fierce, and wicked excitement I ever saw. If abolitionists will set the country in a blaze, it is but fair that they should receive the first warming at the fire." Lastly, abolitionists are like infidels, wholly unaddicted to martyrdom for opinion's sake. Let them understand that they will be caught, lynched, if they come among us, and they will take good heed to keep out of our way. There is not one man among them who has any more idea of shedding his blood in this cause than he has of making war on the Grand Turk. The Reverend Dr. Hill of Virginia said in the New School Assembly, "The abolitionists have made the servitude of the slave harder. If I could tell you some of the dirty tricks which these abolitionists have played, you would not wonder. Some of them have been lynched, and it served them right." These things sufficiently show the estimate which the Southern clergy and church have formed and expressed as to the relative value of slavery and the right of free inquiry. It shows, also, that they consider slavery as so important that they can tolerate and encourage acts of lawless violence and risk all the dangers of encouraging mob law for its sake. These passages and considerations sufficiently show the stand which the Southern Church takes upon this subject. From many of these opinions, shocking as they may appear, some apology may be found in that blinding power of custom, and all those deadly educational influences which always attend the system of slavery, and which must necessarily produce a certain obtuseness of the moral sense in the mind of any man who is educated from childhood under them. There is also, in the habits of mind formed under a system which is supported by continual resort to force and violence, a necessary deadening of sensibility to the evils of force and violence, as applied to other subjects. The whole style of civilization which is formed under such an institution has been not unaptly denominated by a popular writer the Bowie-knife style, and we must not be surprised at its producing a peculiarly martial cast of religious character, and ideas very much at variance with the spirit of the gospel. A religious man, born and educated at the South, has all these difficulties to contend with in elevating himself to the true spirit of the gospel. It was said by one that, after the Reformation, the best of men, being educated under a system of despotism and force, and accustomed from childhood to have force, and not argument, made the test of opinion, came to look upon all controversies very much in a Smithfield light, the question being not as to the propriety of burning heretics, but as to which party ought to be burned. The system of slavery is a simple retrogression of society to the worst abuses of the Middle Ages. We must not therefore be surprised to find the opinions and practices of the Middle Ages as to civil and religious toleration prevailing. However much we may reprobate and deplore those unworthy views of God and religion which are implied in such declarations as are here recorded, however blasphemous and absurd they may appear, still it is apparent that their authors uttered them with sincerity, and this is the most melancholy feature of the case. They are as sincere as Paul when he breathed out threatenings and slaughter, and when he thought within himself that he ought to do many things contrary to the name of Jesus. They are as sincere as the Brahmin or Hindu, conscientiously supporting a religion of cruelty and blood. They are as sincere as many enlightened, scholar-like, and Christian men in modern Europe, who, born and bred under systems of civil and religious despotism, and having them entwined with all their dearest associations of home and country, and having all their habits of thought and feeling biased by them, do most conscientiously defend them. There is something in conscientious conviction, even in the case of the worst kind of opinions, which is not without a certain degree of respectability. That the religion, expressed by the declarations which we have quoted, is as truly antichrist as the religion of the Church of Rome, it is presumed no sensible person out of the sphere of American influences will deny. That there may be very sincere Christians under this system of religion, with all its false principles and all its disadvantageous influences, liberality must concede. The Church of Rome has had its Fenelon, its Thomas à Kempis, and the Southern Church, which has adopted these principles, has had men who have risen above the level of their system. At the time of the Reformation, and now, the Church of Rome had in its bosom thousands of praying, devoted, humble Christians, which, like flowers in the clefts of rocks, could be counted by no eye save God's alone. And so amid the rifts and glaciers of this horrible spiritual and temporal despotism, we hope are blooming flowers of paradise, patient, prayerful, and self-denying Christians. And it is the deepest grief, in attacking the dreadful system under which they have been born and brought up, that violence must be done to their cherished feelings and associations. In another and better world, perhaps, they may appreciate the motives of those who do this. But now another consideration comes to the mind. These Southern Christians have been united in ecclesiastical relations with Christians of the Northern and Free States, meeting with them by their representatives yearly in their various ecclesiastical assemblies. One might hope, in case of such a union, that those debasing views of Christianity and that deadness of public sentiment which were the inevitable result of an education under the slave system might have been qualified by intercourse with Christians in free states, who, having grown up under free institutions, would naturally be supposed to feel the utmost abhorrence of such sentiments. One would have supposed that the church and clergy of the free states would naturally have used the most strenuous endeavors, by all the means in their power, to convince their brethren of errors so dishonorable to Christianity, and tending to such dreadful practical results. One would have supposed also that, failing to convince their brethren, they would have felt it due to Christianity to clear themselves of all complicity with these sentiments, by the most solemn, earnest, and reiterated protests. Let us now inquire what has, in fact, been the course of the Northern Church on this subject. Previous to making this inquiry, let us review the declarations that have been made in the Southern Church, and see what principles have been established by them. 1. That slavery is an innocent and lawful relation, as much as that of parent and child, husband and wife, and any other lawful relation of society. Harmony Presbyterian, South Carolina. 2. That it is consistent with the most fraternal regard for the good of the slave. Charleston Union Presbytery, South Carolina. 3. That masters ought not to be disciplined for selling slaves without their consent. New School Presbyterian Church, Petersburg, Virginia. 4. That the right to buy, sell, and hold men for purposes of gain was given by express permission of God. James Smiley and his Presbyteries. 5. That the laws which forbid the education of the slave are right, and meet the approbation of the reflecting part of the Christian community. Ibid. 6. That the fact of slavery is not a question of morals at all, but is purely one of political economy. Charleston Baptist Association. 7. The right of masters to dispose of the time of their slaves has been distinctly recognized by the Creator of all things. Ibid. 8. That slavery, as it exists in these United States, is not a moral evil. Georgia Conference, Methodist. 9. That, without a new revelation from heaven, no man is entitled to pronounce slavery wrong. 10. That the separation of slaves by sale should be regarded as separation by death, and the parties allowed to marry again. Shiloh Baptist Association and Savannah River Association. 11. That the testimony of colored members of the churches shall not be taken against a white person. Methodist Church. In addition, it has been plainly avowed by the expressed principles and practice of Christians of various denominations that they regard it right and proper to put down all inquiry upon this subject by Lynch law. One would have imagined that these principles were sufficiently extraordinary, as coming from the professors of the religion of Christ, to have excited a good deal of attention in their northern brethren. It also must be seen that, as principles, they are principles of very extensive application, underlying the whole foundations of religion and morality. If not true, they were certainly heresies of no ordinary magnitude, involving no ordinary results. Let us now return to our inquiry as to the course of the Northern Church in relation to them. End of Part 4, Chapter 1. Influence of the American Church on Slavery, Part 2.
Part 4, Chapter 2, Part 1 of A Key to Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit librivox.org. Read by William Jones. Chapter 2. American Church and Slavery, Part 1. In the first place, have any of these opinions ever been treated in the Church as heresies, and the teachers of them been subjected to the censures with which it is thought proper to visit heresy? After a somewhat extended examination upon the subject, the writer has been able to discover but one instance of this sort. It may be possible that such cases have existed in other denominations which have escaped inquiry. A clergyman in the Cincinnati N.S. Presbytery maintained the doctrine that slaveholding was justified by the Bible, and for persistence in teaching this sentiment was suspended by that presbytery. He appealed to synod, and the decision was confirmed by the Cincinnati Synod. The New School General Assembly, however, reversed this decision of the presbytery and restored the standing of the clergyman. The presbytery on its part refused to receive him back, and he was received into the Old School Church. The Presbyterian Church has probably exceeded all other churches of the United States in its zeal for doctrinal opinions. This church has been shaken and agitated to its very foundation with questions of heresy. But, except in this individual case, it is not known that any of these principles which have been asserted by Southern Presbyterian bodies and individuals have ever been discussed in the General Assembly as matters of heresy. About the time that Smiley's pamphlet came out, the Presbyterian Church was convulsed with the trial of the Reverend Albert Barnes for certain alleged heresies. These heresies related to the federal headship of Adam, the propriety of imputing his sin to all his posterity, and the question whether men have any ability of any kind to obey the commandments of God. For advancing certain sentiments on these topics, Mr. Barnes was silenced by the vote of the synod to which he belonged, and his trial in the General Assembly on these points was the all-engrossing topic in the Presbyterian Church for some time. The Reverend Dr. L. Beecher went through a trial with reference to similar opinions. During all this time no notice was taken of the heresy, if such it be, that the right to buy, sell, and hold men for purposes of gain was expressly given by God. Although that heresy was publicly promulgated in the same Presbyterian Church by Mr. Smiley and the presbyteries with which he was connected. If it be accounted for by saying that the question of slavery is a question of practical morals, and not of dogmatic theology, we are then reminded that questions of morals of far less magnitude have been discussed with absorbing interest. The Old School Presbyterian Church, in whose communion the greater part of the slave-holding Presbyterians of the South are found, has never felt called upon to discipline its members for upholding a system which denies legal marriage to all slaves, Yet this church was agitated to its very foundation by the discussion of a question of morals which an impartial observer would only consider of far less magnitude, namely, whether a man might lawfully marry his deceased wife's sister. For all time, all the strength and attention of the church seemed concentrated upon this important subject. The trial went from presbytery to synod, and from synod to general assembly, and ended with deposing a very respectable minister for this crime. Reverend Robert P. Breckenridge, D.D., a member of the Old School Assembly, has thus described the state of the slave population as to their marriage relations. Quote, "The system of slavery denies to a whole class of human beings the sacredness of marriage and of home, compelling them to live in a state of concubinage. For in the eye of the law, no colored slave man is the husband of any wife in particular, nor any slave woman the wife of any husband in particular. No slave man is the father of any children in particular, and no slave child is the child of any parent in particular." End quote. Now, had this church considered the fact that 3 million men and women were, by the laws of the land, obliged to live in this manner, as of equally serious consequence, it is evident from the ingenuity, argument, vehemence, biblical research, and untiring zeal which they bestowed upon Mr. McQueen's trial, that they could have made a very strong case with regard to this also. The history of the united action of denominations, which included churches both in the slave and free states, is a melancholy exemplification, to a reflecting mind, of that gradual deterioration of the moral sense which results from admitting any compromise, however slight, with an acknowledged sin. The best minds in the world cannot bear such a familiarity without injury to the moral sense. The facts of the slave system and of the slave laws, when presented to disinterested judges in Europe, have excited a universal outburst of horror. Yet, in assemblies composed of the wisest and best clergymen of America, these things have been discussed from year to year, and yet brought no results that have, in the slightest degree, lessened the evil. The reason is this: a portion of the members of these bodies had pledged themselves to sustain the system, and peremptorily to refuse and put down all discussion of it. And the other part of the body did not consider this stand, so taken as being of sufficient and vital consequence, to authorize separation. Nobody will doubt that had the Southern members taken such a stand against the divinity of our Lord, the division would have been immediate and unanimous. But yet the Southern members do maintain the right to buy and sell, lease, hire, and mortgage multitudes of men and women, whom with the same breath they declare to be members of their churches and true Christians. The Bible declares all such that they are temples of the Holy Ghost, that they are members of Christ's body, of his flesh and bones. It is not the doctrine that men may lawfully sell the members of Christ, his body, his flesh and bones, for purposes of gain, as really a heresy as a denial as the divinity of Christ. And is it not a dishonor to him who is over all, God blessed forever, to tolerate this dreadful opinion, with its more dreadful consequences, while the smallest heresies concerning the imputation of Adam's sin are pursued with eager vehemence? If the history of the action of all the bodies thus united can be traced downwards, we shall find that, by reason of this tolerance of an admitted sin, the anti-slavery testimony has every year grown weaker and weaker. If we look over the history of all denominations, we shall see that at first they used very stringent language with relation to slavery. This is particularly the case with the Methodist and Presbyterian bodies, and for that reason we select these two as examples. The Methodist Society, especially as organized by John Wesley, was an anti-slavery society, and the Book of Discipline contained the most positive statutes against slaveholding. The history of the successive resolutions of the conference of this church is very striking. In 1780, before the church was regularly organized in the United States, they resolved as follows. Resolution. The conference acknowledges that slavery is contrary to the laws of God, man, and nature, and hurtful to society, contrary to the dictates of conscience and true religion, and doing what we would not others should do unto us. End of resolution. In 1784, when the church was fully organized, rules were adopted prescribing the times at which members who were already slaveholders should emancipate their slaves. These rules were succeeded by the following, quote, "Every person concerned who will not comply with these rules shall have liberty quietly to withdraw from our society within the 12 months following the notice being given him, as aforesaid. Otherwise, the assistants shall exclude him from the society." End of quote. No person holding slaves shall in future be admitted into society or to the Lord's Supper till he previously comply with these rules concerning slavery. Those who buy, sell, or give slaves away, unless on purpose to free them, shall be expelled immediately. In 1801, we declare that we are more than ever convinced of the great evil of African slavery which still exists in these United States. Every member of the society who sells a slave shall immediately, after full proof, be excluded from the society, and so forth. The annual conferences are directed to draw up addresses for the gradual emancipation of the slaves to the legislature. Proper committees shall be appointed by the annual conferences out of the most respectable of our friends for the conducting of the business, and the presiding elders, deacons, and traveling preachers shall procure as many proper signatures as possible to the addresses, and give all the assistance in their power in every respect to aid the committees and to further the blessed undertaking. Let this be continued from year to year till the desired end be accomplished. In 1836, let us notice the change. The General Conference held its annual session in Cincinnati and resolved as follows. Resolved, by the delegates of the annual conferences and General Conference assembled, that they are decidedly opposed to modern abolitionism and fully disclaim any right, wish, or intention to interfere in the civil and political relation between master and slave as it exists in the slaveholding states of this Union. End of resolution. These resolutions were passed by a very large majority. An address was received from the Wesleyan Methodist Conference in England, affectionately remonstrating on the subject of slavery. The conference refused to publish it. In the pastoral address to the churches are these passages. It cannot be unknown to you that the question of slavery in the United States, by the constitutional compact which binds us together as a nation, is left to be regulated by the several state legislatures themselves, and thereby is put beyond the control of the general government, as well as that of all ecclesiastical bodies. It being manifest that in the slaveholding states themselves the entire responsibility of its existence or non-existence rests with those state legislatures. These facts which are only mentioned here as a reason for the friendly admonition which we wish to give you, constrain us as your pastors, who are called to watch over your souls as they must give account, to exhort you to abstain from all abolition movements and associations, and to refrain from patronizing any of their publications, and so forth. The subordinate conferences showed the same spirit. In 1836, the New York Annual Conference resolved that no one should be elected a deacon or elder in the church unless he would give a pledge to the church that he would refrain from discussing this subject. In 1838, the conference resolved, as the sense of this conference, that any of its members or probationers who shall patronize Zion's Watchman, either by writing in commendation of its character, by circulating it, recommending it to our people, or procuring subscribers, or by collecting or remitting monies, shall be deemed guilty of indiscretion and dealt with accordingly. It will be recollected that Zion's Watchman was edited by Leroy Sunderland, for whose abduction the state of Alabama had offered $50,000. In 1840, the General Conference at Baltimore passed the resolution that we have already quoted, forbidding preachers to allow colored persons to give testimony in their churches. It has been computed that about 80,000 people were deprived of the right of testimony by this act. The Methodist Church subsequently broke into a Northern and Southern Conference. The Southern Conference is avowedly all pro-slavery, and the Northern Conference has still in its communion slave-holding conferences and members. Of the Northern Conferences, one of the largest, the Baltimore, passed the following: Resolved, that this conference disclaims having any fellowship with abolitionism. On the contrary, while it is determined to maintain its well-known and long-established position by keeping the traveling preachers composing its own body free from slavery, it is also determined not to hold connection with any ecclesiastical body that shall make non-slaveholding a condition of membership in the church, but to stand by and maintain the discipline as it is. End of resolution. The following extract is made from an address to the Philadelphia Annual Conference to the societies under its care, dated Wilmington, Delaware, April 7th, 1847. If the plan of separation gives us the pastoral care of you, it remains to inquire whether we have done anything as a conference or as men to forfeit your confidence and affection. We are not advised that even in the great excitement which has distressed you for some months past, anyone has impeached our moral conduct or charged us with unsoundness in doctrine, or corruption or tyranny in the administration of discipline. But we learn that the simple cause of the unhappy excitement among you is that some suspect us, or affect to suspect us, of being abolitionists. Yet no particular act of the conference, or any particular member thereof, is adduced as the ground of the erroneous and injurious suspicion. We would ask you, brethren, whether the conduct of our ministry among you for 60 years past ought not to be sufficient to protect us from this charge, whether the question we have been accustomed for a few years past to put to candidates for admission among us, namely, are you an abolitionist? And without each one answered in the negative, he was not received, ought not to protect us from the charge? Whether the action of the last conference on this particular matter ought not to satisfy any fair and candid mind that we are not and do not desire to be abolitionists. We cannot see how we can be regarded as abolitionists without the ministers of the Methodist Episcopal Church South being considered in the same light. Wishing you all heavenly benedictions, we are, dear brethren, yours in Christ Jesus, J.P. Durbin, J. Kennedy, Ignatius T. Cooper, William H. Gilder, Joseph Castle. End of declaration. These facts sufficiently define the position of the Methodist Church. The history is melancholy, but instructive. The history of the Presbyterian Church is also of interest. In 1793, the following note to the 8th Commandment was inserted in the Book of Discipline as expressing the doctrine of the Church upon slaveholding. 1 Timothy 1:10. The law is made for man-stealers. This crime among the Jews exposed the perpetrators of it to capital punishment. Exodus 21:15. And the apostle here classes them with sinners of the first rank. The word he uses, in its original import, comprehends all who are concerned in bringing any of the human race into slavery, or in retaining them in it. Hominum pures qui servos vel liberos abductunt retenet vendunt vel emunt. Stealers of men are all those who bring off slaves or freemen and keep, sell, or buy them. To steal a free man, says Grotius, is the highest kind of theft. In other instances, we only steal human property, but when we steal or retain men in slavery, we seize upon those who, in common with ourselves, are constituted by the original grant lords of the earth. No rules of church discipline were enforced, and members whom this passage declared guilty of this crime remain undisturbed in its communion as ministers and elders. This inconsistency was obviated in 1816 by expunging the passage from the Book of Discipline. In 1818, it adopted an expression of its views on slavery. This document is a long one, conceived and written in a very Christian spirit. The Assembly's Digest says, page 341, that it was unanimously adopted. The following is its testimony as to the nature of slavery. We consider the voluntary enslaving of one part of the human race by another as a gross violation of the most precious and sacred rights of human nature, as utterly inconsistent with the law of God, which requires us to love our neighbors as ourselves, and as totally irreconcilable with the spirit and principles of the gospel of Christ, which enjoin that all things whatsoever ye would that men should do to you, do ye even so to them. Slavery creates a paradox in the moral system. It exhibits rational, accountable, and immoral beings in such circumstances as scarcely to leave them the power of moral action. It exhibits them as dependent upon the will of others, whether they shall receive religious instruction, whether they shall know and worship the true God, whether they shall enjoy the ordinances of the gospel, whether they shall perform the duties and cherish the endearments of husbands and wives, parents and children, neighbors and friends, whether they shall preserve their chastity and purity, or regard the dictates of justice and humanity. Such are some of the consequences of slavery, consequences not imaginary, but which connect themselves with its very existence. The evils to which the slave is always exposed often take place in fact, and in their very worst degree and form, and where all of them do not take place, as we rejoice to say that in many instances, through the influence of the principles of humanity and religion, on the minds of masters they do not, still the slave is deprived of his natural right, degraded as a human being, and exposed to the danger of passing into the hands of a master who may inflict upon them all the hardships and injuries which inhumanity and avarice may suggest. End of declaration. This language was certainly decided, and it was unanimously adopted, by slaveholders and non-slaveholders. Certainly, one might think the time of redemption was drawing nigh. The Declaration goes on to say, "It is manifestly the duty of all Christians who enjoy the light of the present day, when the inconsistency of slavery both with the dictates of humanity and religion has been demonstrated and is generally seen and acknowledged, to use honest, earnest, unwearied endeavors to correct the errors of former times, and as speedily as possible to efface this blot on our holy religion, and obtain the complete abolition of slavery throughout Christendom and throughout the world." End of declaration. Here we have the Presbyterian Church, slaveholding and non-slaveholding, virtually formed into one great abolition society, as we have seen the Methodist was. The Assembly goes on to state that the slaves are not at present prepared to be free, that they tenderly sympathize with the portion of the church and country that has had this evil entailed upon them, where, as they say, quote, "a great and the most virtuous part of the community abhor slavery and wish its extermination," close quote. But they exhort them to commence immediately the work of instructing slaves with a view to preparing them for freedom, and to let no greater delay take place than a regard to public welfare indispensably demands. To be governed by no other considerations than an honest and impartial regard to the happiness of the injured party, uninfluenced by the expense and inconvenience which such regard may involve. It warns against unduly extending this plea of necessity, against making it a cover for the love and practice of slavery. It ends by recommending that anyone who shall sell a fellow Christian without his consent be immediately disciplined and suspended. If we consider that this was unanimously adopted by slaveholders and all, and grant, as we certainly do, that it was adopted in all honesty and good faith, we shall surely expect something from it. We should expect forthwith the organizing of a set of common schools for the slave children, for an efficient religious ministration, for an entire discontinuance of trading in Christian slaves, for laws which make the family relations sacred. Was any such thing done or attempted? Alas! 2 years after this came the admission of Missouri and the increase of demand in the Southern slave market and the internal slave trade. Instead of school teachers, they had slave traders. Instead of gathering schools, they gathered slave coffles. Instead of building schoolhouses, they built slave pens and slave prisons, jails, barracoons, factories, or whatever the trade pleased to term them, and so went the plan of gradual emancipation. In 1834, 16 years after, a committee of the Senate of Kentucky, in which state slavery is generally said to exist in its mildest form, appointed to make a report on the condition of the slaves, gave the following picture of their condition. First, as to their spiritual condition, they say, after making all reasonable allowances, our colored population can be considered, at the most, but semi-heathen. As to their temporal state, brutal stripes and all the various kinds of personal indignities are not the only species of cruelty which slavery licenses. The law does not recognize the family relations of the slave, and extends to him no protection in the enjoyment of domestic endearments. The members of a slave family may be forcibly separated, so that they shall never more meet until the final judgment. and cupidity often induces the masters to practice what the law allows. Brothers and sisters, parents and children, husbands and wives are torn asunder and permitted to see each other no more. These acts are daily occurring in the midst of us. The shrieks and the agony often witnessed on such occasions proclaim, with a trumpet tongue, the iniquity and cruelty of our system. The cries of these sufferers go up to the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth. There is not a neighborhood where these heart-rending scenes are not displayed. There is not a village or road that does not behold the sad procession of manacled outcasts, whose chains and mournful countenances tell that they are exiled by force from all that their hearts hold dear. Our church, years ago, raised its voice of solemn warning against this flagrant violation of every principle of mercy, justice, and humanity. Yet we blush to announce to you and to the world that this warning has been often disregarded even by those who hold to our communion. Cases have occurred in our own denomination where professors of the religion of mercy have torn the mother from her children and sent her into a merciless and returnless exile. Yet acts of discipline have rarely followed such conduct. End of declaration. Honorable James G. Birney, for years a resident of Kentucky, in his pamphlet amends the word rarely by substituting never. What could show more plainly the utter inefficiency of the past act of the Assembly and the necessity of adopting some measures more efficient? In 1835, therefore, the subject was urged upon the General Assembly, entreating them to carry out the principles and designs they had avowed in 1818. Mr. Stewart of Illinois, in a speech he made upon the subject, said, "I hope this assembly are prepared to come out fully and declare their sentiments that slaveholding is a most flagrant and heinous sin. Let us not pass it by in this indirect way, while so many thousands and tens of thousands of our fellow creatures are writhing under the lash, often inflicted too by ministers and elders of the Presbyterian Church. In this church, a man may take a freeborn child, force it away from its parents, to whom God gave it in charge, saying, 'Bring it up for me,' and sell it as a beast or hold it in perpetual bondage, and not only escape corporeal punishment, but really be esteemed an excellent Christian. Nay, even ministers of the gospel and doctors of divinity may engage in this unholy traffic, and yet sustain their high and holy calling. Elders, ministers, and doctors of divinity are with both hands engaged in the practice." One would have thought facts like these, stated in a body of Christians, were enough to wake the dead. But, alas, we can become accustomed to very awful things. No action was taken upon these remonstrances, except to refer them to a committee, to be reported on at the next session in 1836. The moderator of the Assembly in 1836 was a slaveholder, Dr. T.S. Witherspoon, the same who said to the editor of The Emancipator, quote, "I draw my warrant from the Scriptures of the Old and New Testament to hold my slaves in bondage. The principle of holding the heathen in bondage is recognized by God. When the tardy process of the law is too long in redressing our grievances, we at the South have adopted the summary process of Judge Lynch." Close quote. The majority of the committee appointed made a report as follows. Begin report. Whereas the subject of slavery is inseparably connected with the laws of many states in this Union, with which it is by no means proper for an ecclesiastical judicature to interfere, and involves many considerations in regard to which great diversity of opinion and intensity of feeling are known to exist in the churches represented in this assembly. And whereas there is great reason to believe that any action on the part of this assembly in reference to this subject would tend to distract and divide our churches, and would probably in no wise promote the benefit of those whose welfare is immediately contemplated in the memorials in question, therefore resolved, 1. That it is not expedient for the assembly to take any further order in relation to this subject. 2. That as the notes, which have been expunged from our public formularies, and which some of the memorials referred to the committee request to have restored, were introduced irregularly, never had the sanction of the church, and therefore never possessed any authority. The General Assembly has no power, nor would they think it expedient to assign them a place in the authorized standards of the church. The minority of the committee, the Reverend Messrs. Dickey and Beeman, reported as follows. Resolved, 1. That the buying, selling, or holding of a human being as property is in the sight of God a heinous sin, and ought to subject the doer of it to the censures of the church. 2. That it is the duty of everyone, and especially every Christian who may be involved in this sin, to free himself from its entanglement without delay. 3. That it is the duty of everyone, especially of every Christian, in the meekness and firmness of the gospel, to plead the cause of the poor and needy by testifying against the principle and practice of slaveholding, and to use his best endeavors to deliver the Church of God from the evil, and to bring about the emancipation of the slaves in these United States and throughout the world. The slaveholding delegates, to the number of 48, met apart and resolved that if the General Assembly shall undertake to exercise authority upon the subject of slavery so as to make it an immorality, or shall in any way declare that Christians are criminal in holding slaves, that a declaration shall be presented by the Southern delegation declining their jurisdiction in the case, and our determination not to submit to such decision. End report. In view of these conflicting reports, the Assembly resolved as follows. Inasmuch as the Constitution of the Presbyterian Church, in its preliminary and fundamental principles, declares that no church judicatories ought to pretend to make laws to bind the conscience in virtue of their own authority, and as the urgency of the business of the Assembly and the shortness of time during which they can continue in session render it impossible to deliberate and decide judiciously on the subject of slavery in its relation to the church. Therefore, resolved that this whole subject be indefinitely postponed. End of Part 4, Chapter 2, American Church and Slavery, Part 1.